right, now we move on to section 3, historical and canonical proof. For this section, we will first watch some videos from a series called Papal Impostors, which contain information that I believe is crucial to an understanding of this current crisis and what exactly happened to the Pope from 1958 onwards. I don't agree with everything the author of these videos believes or says, but I will try to only show information I agree with. If I do not agree with something, I will make that clear, okay? Because they do make some religious claims that I don't agree with, and I'd like to clarify, I don't agree with that, okay? I will also pause and comment as we watch these videos, right? So when I mentioned there that I don't agree with everything the author says, I'll try to only show stuff I agree with. As far as I recall, I think there may be like other, because this is basically like a series they made. And I think when I first put these slides together, there are certain chapters that I didn't include or something like that. So that's probably what I'm alluding to there, okay? But if they say something that I don't agree with, like theologically, as far as Catholic teaching or anything like that, I will clarify that, all right? This is part 1. It is called Historical Precedents, part 1 of 12, it says, okay? It says, this film will attempt to show that Catholics around the world have been defrauded of their inheritance, the unadulterated teachings of the Catholic Church, and the one and true holy sacrifice of the Mass. Now, of course, this statement is correct, right? In the sense of, if you're speaking about actual Catholics, yes. But this person, they seem to be someone who like just uses the name Catholic with little respect. Like they would call a bunch of heretics Catholics and like stuff like that. Like I don't call someone Catholic unless they have the true Catholic faith and accept the true papacy. That's it. If you don't fall into that category, I would not just call you a Catholic. I may say like a so-called Catholic or a quote unquote Catholic, but to just say Catholic, I'm not going to call you just Catholic unless you match, as I mentioned, the true faith and you accept the true papacy. Okay, but this person is very loose and willy-nilly with how they use the name Catholic. And I've seen many other people doing that as well, where they call like a bunch of Novus Ordo people Catholics, but like, oh, these Catholics are being misled. They're not Catholics if they believe a bunch of blasphemy about sodomy is okay and adultery is okay and Protestants are being saved. Those people are not Catholics, man. Stop calling anyone a Catholic who just claims to be Catholic. It's like you have no respect for the Catholic name. Don't just call these people Catholic just because they say they're Catholic, man. That really annoys me. Continuing. All right, if the film achieves its objective, you will realize that you've been robbed and who robbed you, and you will take back what is yours. And of course, I mean, it is yours if you're a real Catholic. It's not yours if you're a heretic, okay?
This first segment will establish that the papacy does, from time to time, get usurped. We will look at one specific case, that of Pope Innocent II, as it bears some parallels to what we face today. We will also examine the criteria which St. Bernard used to discern that Innocent II was indeed the true pope. Finally, we will fast forward to the papal conclave of 1903, where nefarious forces almost succeeded in getting control of the papal throne. The year is 1130 AD. The reigning pope dies and is quickly buried. Two rival Roman families intend to put their own respective candidates on the papal throne. A new pope is elected by a group of cardinals on behalf of the first family. He takes the name Pope Innocent II. When the rival family receives word of the election, they are furious and elect one of their own with another group of cardinals. He takes the name Anacletus II. Anacletus, having more power in Rome, captures St. Peter's and the Lateran, while Pope Innocent goes into hiding.
So look at that. Look at that, right? Pope Innocent goes into hiding as the anti-pope controls Rome. That is exactly what is happening today. But of course, this person, they don't seem to be aware of Gregory the 18th as far as the content of the videos that I saw. So this person doesn't even realize that exact same thing, like to a T, is what is happening today. Anti-popes controlling Rome and the true pope in hiding. This is not the first time this has happened, okay?
Anacletus was nearly universally accepted as Bishop of Rome until his death 8 years later in 1138.
And look at that. The anti-pope was nearly universally accepted as the true pope, while the real pope was in hiding, just like today.
Shortly after, Pope Victor IV was elected, but soon resigned after the intervention of St. Bernard, and Pope Innocent ascended to the papal throne. 8 years after his initial election, St. Bernard gave the following as to why he supported Innocent II. The life and character of our Pope Innocent are above any attack, even of his rival, while the others are not safe even from his friends. In the second place, if you compare the elections, that of our candidate at once has the advantage over the other as being purer in motive, more regular in form, and earlier in time. The last point is out of all doubt. The other two are proved by the merit and the dignity of the electors. You will find, if I mistake not, that this election was made by the more discreet part of those to whom the election of the Supreme Pontiff belongs. There were cardinals, bishops, and priests in sufficient number to make a valid election. The consecration was performed by the Bishop of Ostia, to whom that function specifically belongs.
So I want to mention something. You see here the quote from St. Bernard, where he says, let me see, in the second place, if you compare the elections, that of our candidate at once has the advantage over the other as being purer in motive, as he said. He wrote purer motive, but he said purer in motive. The author, I mean. More regular in form, right? And I want to talk about the part when it says more regular in form. So in the case of, like, let's say the Palmarians, if I recall correctly, their first anti-pope claimed to have been, like, divinely elected, right? Just like, somehow God made him the pope. And in the case of, like, let's say some random anti-pope, like a so-called, anti-pope Michael the First, right? Whose real name I think was David Bowden, right? I believe that was his real name, his, like, legal government name. He claimed to have been elected by, like, I think, like, a bunch of laymen and his parents or something like that. Of course, that is a very irregular election, right? You have a bunch of laymen claiming to elect a pope, very irregular, right? Another case would be, like, as I said, I think there's some, like, random anti-pope in South America that claim to have been elected by, like, let's say a bunch of random people in South America, right? Same thing, irregular, right? The Palmarian thing about this guy claiming to be divinely elected by God, like, God just somehow made him the Pope, very irregular, right? These are very irregular claims to being elected, right? But as far as the true papacy is concerned, there's nothing irregular about it other than it being secret, right? As far as Pope Gregory XVII, or our Cardinal Giuseppe Siri before he became Pope, his election was completely regular. It happened in the 1958 papal conclave. The entire world knew this conclave was happening, okay? So the true papacy, one of the things that for me proves the true papacy is the fact that we can trace Pope Gregory XVIII's lineage back to legitimate public conclave, right? Because the 1958 conclave was the last legitimate public conclave. The conclave in 1991 was a legitimate private or secret conclave, right? So the fact that we can trace Gregory XVIII's papacy, his lineage back to the 1958 conclave, for me is another strong point. It is not some irregular thing where it's just some random person just claims that they've been made the Pope, right, with no link to the 1958 conclave or anything. But the fact that we can trace Gregory XVIII back to that historical event that is publicly accepted as having happened, that for me is a strong point to bolster the legitimacy of this papacy as well. We can historically trace it back to that pivotal event where everything started to go south. You understand? But if some random dude just claims that God made him Pope, how can you trust that, or how can you verify that, or how can you know that it was really God that elected him and not some demon that appeared to him or something? You know what I mean? But with Gregory XVIII, you don't have that irregularity. The only irregular thing is the fact that it was a secret conclave in 1991, but the Pope being hidden from the world, all that kind of stuff was prophesied. Okay.
Time. The last of the made their work specifically belongs. After Innocent II reclaimed the papacy at the Second Lateran Council, he annulled all the clergy ordained by Anacletus, proclaiming them schismatic and heretical. Both Anacletus II and Victor IV are considered false popes, also called antipopes, impostors who usurped the chair of Peter with the aid of men of great power and influence. The National Catholic Almanac lists 41 such false popes. Roughly 1 in 7 of all popes was an impostor.
Of course, I would say, he says 1 in 7 of all popes was an impostor. I get what he means, but I would probably hedge that by saying, basically saying like popes in quotations or something, because an antipope is not a real pope, right? So it's not 1 in 7 popes, right? You could say like for every 7 real popes, you have like 1 antipope or something like that, or for every 6 real popes, you have 1 antipope, basically, because the antipopes are not real popes, okay?
At the 1903 Papal Conclave, a prelate named Cardinal Rampolla received enough votes to become pope, but to everyone at the conclave's surprise, a veto was presented on behalf of His Imperial Majesty Franz Joseph of Austria, annulling the election. It turned out that Rampolla was Grand Master with the OTO, and
dude, when you look at this guy right here, even because I haven't watched this video in probably like over a year, just looking at this guy, for some reason he just looks evil. Like he looks like Dracula dressed in like papal or in Catholic attire. He looks sinister, and he was sinister because he was a Freemason.
Of His Imperial Majesty Franz Joseph of Austria, annulling the election. It turned out that Rampolla was Grand Master with the OTO, an occult sect which included occultists Aleister Crowley and Rudolf Steiner.
And let me see here. So I guess, let me see. I'm not sure if the Ordo Templis Orientis is part of the Freemasons, technically speaking, but I mean, they're also like a secret society kind of thing, right? Let me see.
Included occultists.
Right, Aleister Crowley. Later in the Palmarian section, I think, we're going to be talking about aliens, right? Because the Palmarians, I think actually also the quote unquote apostles of infinite love, they also believe in aliens. So that alone is another point against them. It's a very odd, strange belief to hold. The Catholic Church has never taught anything about aliens and all that nonsense, okay? So this guy, Aleister Crowley here, the modern so-called aliens, alien phenomenon, whatever you want to call it, it is pretty much a guarantee that they're actually just demons, okay? Because this guy, Aleister Crowley, once, I think he drew an image of this entity he said would appear to him, and he called it Lamb, right? Lam, I think, Lamb. And if you see an image of this creature, and I'll probably put an image on the screen so you can see, the creature looks just like what people would today call a so-called gray alien, okay? So the so-called alien phenomenon, I believe, is actually just demons messing with people. You know what I mean? Like even Bigfoot, I think is 99% probably just demons messing with people. Now, I think it could be possible that there are some real creatures that are like hairy, bipedal, whatever. I don't think it's impossible. I mean, even, and it's not contrary to Catholic teaching either, because some church fathers believe that like satyrs were real, like Saint Anthony of Egypt believed that satyrs were real creatures, so it is not against Catholic teaching to believe that there may be strange creatures in the world. But for Bigfoot, for example, I was once very, very into the whole Bigfoot thing. I would watch the show called Finding Bigfoot and all this kind of stuff. And even last year, I kind of like had an interest in it again. And so I would watch people, different shows about Bigfoot, or people talking about Bigfoot, and they're sharing their stories and stuff like that. And something that I saw reoccurring, I was like, when I heard someone's story, I was like, dude, that is a demon. I was just like, it was so obvious to me. Like, there was even a guy where he said he went to some forest camping or whatever, or some place camping, and Bigfoot was like, hanging out with him and talking to him mentally or something like that. And he said that this creature told him that its name was Lucifer. And I was like, dude, how stupid do you have to be talking to some random strange creature that tells you its name is Lucifer, and you can't tell that that's a demon? Seriously? And that's why, like, I can't stomach to follow infidels very much sometimes. Like, sometimes I have to take like a very long break from watching infidels videos or listening to infidels, because I'm just like, their stupidity baffles me and disgusts me and infuriates me. I'm like, how could this thing literally is like if a demon appears to you and tells you, I'm a demon, and you're like, no, you're not, you're Bigfoot. You know what I mean? Like, that's how stupid it is. The thing literally said its name is Lucifer, and this guy still thinks it was just like Bigfoot. I'm like, you serious, man? Anyways, and there's another story where this guy was talking about how he went to some kind of, foresty kind of area. And in that area, they would often hear these like howls and stuff like that. And they believe like Bigfoot was out there. And this guy said he wanted to like be brave and not run from them or whatever. So he was like on the hood of his car, just like kind of leaning on the hood of his car. And he could hear all these Bigfoot creatures or whatever screaming and yelling and stuff in the woods and in the trees, trying to like scare him or whatever. And he was like, I'm not running. I'm not scared. I'm not going anywhere. And he stood there. And then he said, out of nowhere, he heard this one distinct howl that was so terrifying that it sounded like it was literally from the bowels of hell. And he was like, okay, yeah, I'm leaving. I'm done. I'm gone. And I was like, dude, the reason it sounds like it's from the bowels of hell is because it is. These things are demons, man. But the world is so faithless today, right? That people would rather believe in aliens and Bigfoot than believe that demons are real. That's how faithless the world is. The world is so faithless, even by, like, say, Protestant standards, that they'd rather believe in Bigfoot and aliens than believe the truth that demons are real. Because when someone talks about these experiences with, Bigfoot or aliens and stuff like that, as far as Bigfoot, I think it could be possible there may be some hairy creature. I don't know, right? But even so, even if there really is some hairy Bigfoot creature, there are still, I think the majority of cases are either people lying, people having mental issues, or people being messed with by demons. Okay, so all of this was kind of like off tangent, but this Aleister Crowley guy, his so-called entity, the entity called so-called Lamb or whatever, looks basically the same as modern so-called gray aliens. And of course, the Palmarians and the Palmarians, I'm pretty sure the Palmarians, but definitely the quote-unquote Apostles of Infinite Love, they believe in aliens. So they're basically being deceived by demons. You understand? To believe a bunch of weird nonsense. They have false prophecies and all sorts of stuff. But we'll get into that in the later sections, all right?
Aleister Crowley and Rudolf Steiner. The 1903 conclave instead produced Pius X, whose pontificate was a major setback for what was known as the Rampolla clique. Following the death of Pius X, however, the lingering influence of this malignant faction resumed and strengthened. We will make note of just one member of the group, Rampolla's closest friend and confidant, Bishop Radini Tedeschi.
And I want to add this too. You see this whole thing about like these secret societies trying to like overtake the visible power of the papacy and stuff like that. I can't remember where I saw it, and God willing, I'd like to find the information again. But I remember seeing a quote somewhere. It may have been from Albert Pike, who was like a big Freemason, saying that basically the Catholic Church is their number one enemy. It is the number one thing that they must destroy, right? And which, of course, once again, I mean, that alone, the fact that the Catholic Church is the number one target for the Satanic Society shows you that the Catholic Church is actually God's true church, right? They're not trying to destroy Protestantism. They're not trying to destroy Mormonism. They're not trying to destroy Islam. They're not trying to destroy Judaism. They're trying to destroy the Catholic Church, because that is God's church. They are the devil's agents. And so their main target is God's church, which is the Catholic Church. And another quote that I saw from like a Freemason or something like that was talking about how one of their, basically for them, it would be a very great accomplishment to one day have a pope that is basically in harmony with their goals. Like to have a pope that is on their side. That is like for them a very big accomplishment that they would like to see, or something like that. So I can't remember where I saw those quotes. I tried looking for them, but I couldn't find them. But if God wills, I hope I'll find them again. And if I do, I'll, either, I guess, God willing, share them in the YouTube post section, or actually I may consider making an actual video about the whole like Freemasonry versus the Catholic Church sort of thing.
Who would take a young priest by the name of Angelo Ron. Make note of just one member of the group, Rampolla's closest friend and confidant, Bishop Radini Tedeschi, who would take a young priest by the name of Angelo Roncalli under his wing and set him on a course to the papal throne.
Dang, look at that.
Nearly 500 million Catholic.
Oh, this one is called, let's see, this is a new video. It's called, let me change slides. 1 second, hold on. All right, part 2, October 1958. Let's close this. Or I can just let them run through. We'll see. Oh boy. I hate this thing like popping up all the time. Why does it keep doing that? Okay, all right, let's go.
Nearly 500 million Catholics are joined by countless numbers of other creeds in mourning Pius XII. His spiritual reign began on his 63rd birthday in 1939, on the eve of one of the world's most stormy eras, with his consecration as the 266th pontiff in the unbroken succession of the Church. His was a tireless pace, even at...
Just a random note. I just realized he said on his 63rd birthday is when he became Pope. Okay, I guess that makes sense, because it was hold on, let me see.
63rd birthday in mourning Pius XII. His spiritual reign began on his 63rd birthday in 1939.
Okay, in 1939 he was 63. Honestly, he looked very young for his age then, because when even close to his death, he didn't look like 60. Well, would have been like 80 something probably. He didn't look like that old,
On the eve of one of the world's most stormy eras, with his consecration as the 266th pontiff in the unbroken succession of the Church. His was a tireless pace, even after his near-fatal illness of 4 years ago, to the very eve of his fatal stroke. Now his memorable reign is ended, and the world mourns a beloved and compassionate man of God.
Pope Pius XII died on October 9, 1958. His doctor, Gaspanini, said afterwards, "The Holy Father did not die because of any specific illness. His heart was healthy. His lungs were good. He could have lived another 20 years."
It says, as of the death of Pius XII, there were 55 cardinals, 2 of whom were in communist countries and could not attend the conclave, leaving 53. A 2/3 plus 1 majority is required to elect a new pope, which left the required number for a majority at 37.
Eight days later, on October 17th, Cardinal Celso Costantini, Chancellor of the Holy Roman Church, also died of heart failure, the day after declaring his desire to attend the papal conclave in the Sistine Chapel.
With the death of Cardinal Costantini, 36 votes were needed to elect a new pope.
The following week, another cardinal died of what physicians thought was a heart attack, the very day he was to enter the conclave. His name was Cardinal Mooney, Archbishop of Detroit. Here is an excerpt from the New York Times.
I want to mention here, these, how do we say, suspicious deaths of several cardinals before the 1958 conclave may be another aspect of the fulfillment of the spilling of the blood of the martyrs. Because if these cardinals were in fact murdered by secret society members to prevent them from being a problem to attaining their satanic ends in the 1958 conclave, then I would think that they would qualify as martyrs because they're being murdered out of hatred for Christianity, right? I'm not 100% sure if they would definitely qualify as martyrs, but I could see that likely being the case. And if it is indeed the case, if they would qualify as martyrs, then if they were murdered for those reasons, and that is sufficient qualification, then that could be a fulfillment of, as the church fathers were quoted as saying by Malvenda, the spilling of the blood of the martyrs, right? More cruelly than ever.
He had lunch with... Here is an excerpt from the New York Times. He had lunch with Cardinals Spellman and McIntyre and appeared in good spirits when he smoked a cigar afterward. He told his secretary to call him in 25 minutes. When Monsignor Breitenbach entered the Cardinal's bedroom at 2:45 p.m., the prelate was dying. 5 minutes later, he was dead.
Let me see this here, the series of events. Hold on. He had lunch with Cardinals Spellman and McIntyre and appeared in good spirits when he smoked a cigar afterward. Then he went upstairs for a short rest before he was to leave for the Vatican to enter the conclave. Okay.
Smoked a cigar afterward. He told his secretary to call him in 25 minutes.
When Monsignor Breitenbach entered the Cardinal's bedroom at 2:45 p.m., the prelate was dying.
When Monsignor Breitenbach entered the Cardinal's bedroom at 2:45 p.m., the prelate was dying. 5 minutes later, he was dead.
Dr. Filippo Rocci of the Vatican's medical service, who arrived soon afterward, attributed the Cardinal's death to his heart condition and drew up a certificate giving 2:50 p.m. as the time of death. And as far as I'm aware, so it seems that both of these cardinals, their deaths were ascribed to heart attacks or heart failure. Let me see. Yes, heart collapse. Then we have here heart attack. Hold on.
Conclave. His name was Cardinal Mooney.
All right, hold on. I'm just trying to so there's 2 so far, I believe. Yeah. Let me see. Just verifying how many cardinals were mentioned here.
8 days later, on October 17th, Cardinal Celso Costantini, Chancellor of the Holy Roman Church, also died of heart failure, the day after declaring his desire to attend the papal conclave in the Sistine Chapel.
Okay, that's one from heart failure.
The following week, another cardinal died of what physicians thought was a heart attack, the very day he was to enter the conclave. His name was Cardinal Mooney, Archbishop of Detroit.
Now, I think there's only two, right? Let me see.
Here is an excerpt from the New York Times. He had lunch with Cardinals Spellman and McIntyre and appeared in good 25 minutes. Eliot was dying. 5 minutes later, he was dead.
Okay, so you see two cardinals there, both being said to have died from heart attacks, heart failure, heart problems, heart collapse, that kind of stuff. It is my understanding, I don't know if it's 100% true or whatever, but I've heard that there are certain, let's say, secret government or military devices which can actually, I think if you point it at somebody and press a button or something, it can send some kind of signal to their body or something like that basically it induces a heart attack basically. So it could be possible that these prelates were murdered using such a device or something similar, right? Something which would make it seem as though they had a natural heart attack when in fact it was induced by some outside force. Okay. Now, I'm not saying these prelates were definitely murdered, but it is quite odd to see the Pope dies, then another cardinal dies, a Pope dies, a cardinal dies, another cardinal dies, and they both have this heart failure thing, is a bit suspicious. Oh, and it says here, was the elimination of two cardinals necessary for the infiltrators to control the outcome of the conclave? Right? And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier, where perhaps these two cardinals were seen as stumbling blocks or obstacles that would kind of mess up the plan for getting the conclave to go in the Freemasons or whatever secret society's favor. And give me 1 second, my computer, I have to unplug it. All right, continuing. In addition to these deaths, a Chinese cardinal arrived at the conclave with broken ribs after being struck by a car, and a German cardinal supposedly fell and fractured his spine. So you see, it really looks like these cardinals were being targeted. They're being targeted. And perhaps these two cases here were failed assassination attempts. And you see, that's why I say the legitimate papacy has to be able to be traced back to the 1958 conclave. Okay? Can't just be some random dude who claims that some angel elected him or some random person said a bunch of laymen made him the Pope. None of that kind of stupidness, okay? It has to be traced back to the 1958 conclave because that was the last legitimate public conclave. That is where the church was visibly usurped. That is where things took that pivotal turn towards darkness, okay? The 1958 conclave. That is the starting point that we must investigate and look at first, and then trace what happened after that. Okay, that's as they say, a watershed moment.
Covered the deaths of the Pope and two cardinals in the...
Or a watershed event.
Having covered the deaths of the Pope and two cardinals in the space of 16 days, a short note on poison is in order. Poison has long been the method of choice of enemy agents operating within the Vatican. Pope Clement XIII and Pope Clement XIV were poisoned in 1769 and 1774, both after trying to rein in the Jesuit order. It is claimed that Pius XI was poisoned in retaliation for 2 encyclicals he had written, one condemning Hitler, the other Mussolini. John Paul I.
Oh yeah, I want to mention this. So it's very, very strange to me, and I don't know why this is such a common thing. And I spoke to someone actually very, recently about this as well via email. There are a lot of people who consider themselves to be traditional Catholics and stuff, who have this kind of obsession with Hitler. Like this obsession with claiming that Hitler was a Catholic and he was a friend of the church and he was actually not as bad as people say and stuff like that is very weird. And I don't know why this is such a common thing. Like I knew when I was a sedevacantist years ago, I knew a sedevacantist who actually has a YouTube channel and is obviously teaching a bunch of heresy and foolishness if he still holds what he held then and if he's still a sedevacantist, right? But he literally considered himself to be a Nazi. Like he wasn't just saying, oh, Hitler wasn't as bad as people say. He literally considered himself to be a Nazi. Okay. And for me, I'm not like, there's these like liberal left-wing politics where like they call anyone who doesn't agree with liberal radical nonsense a Nazi. Like I don't get as offended as some people would by these kinds of things. Okay. Like for me, if you're a Nazi or you're a heretic is really the same to me. You're both godless. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't despise the Nazi more than I despise the Protestant. Like to me, they're all just godless. You understand? I just see them all as godless. So the person being a Nazi wasn't like a special, oh, how could you be a Nazi? It wasn't like that. Cause I could say the same thing about a Protestant. How could you be a Protestant? You understand? Cause it's all still blasphemy and heresy and stuff. But as far as this person considered himself to be a Nazi, they were so obsessed with this Hitler thing. And I talked to them about how Hitler at first had an agreement with the church called the Reich Concordat, okay? Where the Catholic Church and Hitler agreed on certain, things they would work on together or certain protections for Catholics in Germany and that kind of stuff like that, okay? And I think that this was before the whole like Jewish execution stuff really started happening. But Hitler and the Nazi government did not honor that agreement, okay? And they violated many terms within it. As far as the specific details, I don't know them off the top of my, just my memory like that, but there is actually an article I saw about it. You could even look at the Wikipedia page and look at different articles that are linked there and stuff like that as well. There is this stuff is on Wikipedia too. But remember, Wikipedia, for something like this, I wouldn't just go to Wikipedia and just read what's there. Like actually, there are in Wikipedia, there are like links, like you see the little numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and stuff. Those are links to like articles and books and stuff like that. So I click those to go more in depth if this is something that you are really, really wanting to, know very well and stuff like that. But basically, Hitler and the Nazi government did not honor the agreement they had with the church. Okay. And Pope Pius XI wrote an encyclical called Mit brennender Sorge, which is, I believe, with burning concern or something like that in English, talking about the Nazi government not honoring the agreement and calling Nazism a kind of paganism. Okay, so Hitler was not some friend of the church and, he was actually a really good Catholic and all that stuff. He was a heretic. He promoted something called so-called positive Christianity, where they were trying to basically like merge Protestants and Catholics together and all sorts of heresy and stuff like that. So Hitler was not some, good Catholic figure and all that kind of stuff. Okay. If he was an actual good Catholic figure, then we would see that recorded in Catholic history. Like the Catholic Church would have documented that, spoken well of him and all that kind of stuff. But no, what did the Catholic Church do? At first they had an agreement, but the Pope later wrote an encyclical talking about the problems with the Nazi government, them not honoring the agreement, Nazism being a kind of paganism and that kind of stuff. Okay.
Condemning Hitler, the other Mussolini. John Paul I is widely believed to have been poisoned in 1978.
Now, I don't even know why he showed this guy, because this guy was an anti-pope, okay? So he's not really completely relevant to what we're discussing here. We're talking about popes being poisoned and cardinals being poisoned and stuff like that. This guy's an anti-pope, okay? But if you want to go along with, if you want to look at it from the perspective of, people being poisoned in the Vatican and stuff, then okay, I guess it could make sense then.
8. When he tried to rid the Vatican, Paul I is widely, the other Mussolini. John Paul I is widely believed to have been poisoned in 1978 when he tried to rid the Vatican of Freemasons. Were these prelates eliminated in the same way in October 1958 in a plot to seize control of the church? The events that transpired in the following conclave certainly make it appear so.
All right, so that is part 2. Let's move on to part 3, the chosen candidate. Let me get rid of this. Yeah, this thing here. I just hate how that thing just pops up all the time. It's so annoying. All right, part 3, the chosen candidate. Oh boy. Hold on. Okay, it should be good now? Yeah, all right.
Pius XII was an ardent foe of communism and a major stumbling block in the communist Masonic plan for world revolution. In order to achieve their aims, these subversive groups not only had to eliminate Pius XII, but also had to ensure that whoever succeeded him would soften the church's stand against communism. The man they had picked out for the job was Cardinal Angelo Roncalli of Venice, whose election to the papal throne was planned well in advance by unholy forces. Let's look at a few testimonies, starting with Franco Bellegrandi, member of the Vatican Noble Guard. Bellegrandi recounts in his book, Nikita Roncalli, an exchange he had with a high-ranking Freemason a week before the conclave.
The next pope will not be Siri, as it is murmured in some Roman circles, because he is too authoritarian a cardinal. The choice has already fallen on the Patriarch of Venice, Roncalli.
Chosen by whom?
By our Masonic representatives in the conclave.
There are Freemasons in the conclave?
Certainly, the church is in our hands.
Next up is 3-time Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti, who wrote in one of his books about being summoned by Roncalli the day before the conclave. During their meeting, Roncalli told him that he had already been congratulated by General de Gaulle. Andreotti wrote of the meeting, "I listened stupefied and embarrassed. I thus knew that Roncalli was sure of being elected by the conclave." Now we come to Cardinal Tisserand, who was Dean of the College of Cardinals at the 1958 conclave. A letter from Cardinal Tisserand to a professor teaching canon law was published in the Italian periodical Vita. Within that letter was the startling statement: the election of John the 23rd was illegitimate because it was willed and planned for by forces alien to the Holy Spirit. And lastly, we will present an article by journalist Elizabeth Gerstner, which appeared in a major German newspaper the morning of the conclave. The article stated in advance that it would be Cardinal Roncalli that would be elected Pope at the conclave.
All right, now we move on to, let's see. Part 4, the 1958 conclave. All right. Let me close this. Okay.
Thousands fill St. Peter's Square as the conclave of the College of Cardinals begins. Cardinal Tisserand, Dean of the Sacred College, leads them to the Sistine Chapel, where they are sealed off from the outside world during their deliberations until the next pope is chosen.
This is Cardinal Giuseppe Siri, Archbishop of Genoa. Cardinal Siri was the most popular cleric in Italy at the time of the conclave, and the man most observers expected to be proclaimed Pope. He was also Pius XII's desired successor. Pius XII made him Archbishop of Genoa when he was 40, and made him Cardinal when he was just 47, at the time the youngest of the College of Cardinals. He was a staunch traditionalist and adamantly opposed to innovation. He is also the man many believe was the true pope elected at the 1958 conclave, 2 days before Angelo Roncalli.
Here is the Sistine Chapel, as set for the election of the 262nd pontiff. Each of the 51 cardinals present occupies his throne during each...
This is 77-year-old Cardinal Angelo Roncalli, a man who had been dismissed from his teaching position at the Lateran Seminary in Rome for promoting the revolutionary theories of Rudolf Steiner. He was also known to socialize frequently with high-level Freemasons, communists, and modernists. A man who Pius XII, at the behest of the FBI and the U.S. State Department, sent off to Venice as Archbishop in hopes to keep him out of trouble for the remainder of his life. Hardly a desirable profile for a papal candidate.
Actual round of balloting. The results are signaled by this stove to the watching world. Straw from old wine boxes is mixed with the unsuccessful ballots to send up black smoke. A successful ballot will be marked by white smoke. In the square outside...
What the narrator says here is not quite right. The ballots are always burned after every second balloting. When no one received enough ballots, wet straw is added to the ballots, which produces a thick, dark smoke. On the other hand, if a new pope is chosen, dry straw is added, which produces pure white smoke, easily distinguishable from the first type. It's a very simple procedure. Anyone can try it themselves in their backyard.
Eager attention is concentrated on the thin chimney atop the Sistine Chapel to the right of St. Peter's Basilica. It is almost noon when the first puff or fumetta appears. It's white.
This is the first fumetta, which appeared shortly before noon on the first day of balloting, Sunday, October 26th. The second fumetta, which we will see shortly, appeared at 5:55 p.m. and lasted a full 5 minutes before turning dark. It is important to note that at the previous papal conclave, which elected Pius XII, the white smoke burned for only 2 minutes.
Excitement fills the square until the second black puff emerges moments later. Rebuffed enthusiasm makes the deadlock of the cardinals seem all the longer through the succeeding ballots.
Oh boy. Hold on. Using videos on PowerPoint is so clunky. Where was I? Hold on. Said, where was it? It said later that day as darkness. Oh, here we go. Around here.
All along through the succeeding ballots.
Later that day as darkness falls upon Rome, both literally and spiritually.
This footage was taken by journalist Jacques Perrault and produced and broadcast by French Radio and Television Broadcasting. What you are seeing now is footage from the fateful Sunday evening in October 1958. Over 200,000 people are gathered in St. Peter's Square awaiting the new pope. Little do they know, as darkness falls on Rome, that an imposter is on hand waiting to claim...
So I just want to hear how many people you said were there. Hold on.
This footage from the fateful Sunday evening in October 1958. Over 200,000 people are gathered in St. Peter's Square awaiting the new pope. Little do they know, as darkness falls on Rome, that an imposter is on hand waiting to claim the chair of Peter. This is the very clear emission of white smoke which lasted for 5 minutes. Naturally, the cardinals and the men at the stove can hear the chorus of 200,000 voices celebrating the news. If a pope has not been elected, then it would be time to throw some wet straw into the stove and change the signal. But the white smoke persists. the announcer on Vatican radio, Padre Pellegrino, exclaims, "The smoke is white. There can be no doubt. A pope has been elected."
And of course, a pope was elected, Giuseppe Siri, but then he was, I guess you could say, what would be the right word for it? I'm trying to think of a word for that. He was blocked, like, basically he was, intimidated and all that kind of stuff. And a conflict ensued, right?
Reports go out around the world that a new pope has been elected. Vatican officials scramble to their positions to greet the new pope. The crowd looks to the balcony, where the pope should appear within 20 minutes. But no pope appears. Later that evening, Vatican radio announces that there had been a mistake and that no pope had been chosen. At the time of this event, it would have been inconceivable to most people that the election of a pope could be suppressed in such a way. But looking back over 50 years of destruction, many are arriving at this moment as the pivotal event in the decline of the church. The smoke signal was no mistake. Someone became pope that night. The subsequent question is, who was it? As mentioned before, Cardinal Siri was the man most people thought would succeed Pope Pius XII. We will now turn to two other sources who claim that Cardinal Siri became Pope that evening. Our first source is FBI consultant Dr. Paul L. Williams. Williams quotes two State Department declassified files in his book, The Vatican Exposed. In 1958, when the cardinals were locked away in the Sistine Chapel to elect a new pope, mysterious events began to unfold. On the third ballot, Siri, according to FBI sources, obtained the necessary votes and was elected as Pope Gregory XVII. On the next page, Williams continues. On the fourth ballot, according to FBI sources, Siri again obtained the necessary votes and was elected Supreme Pontiff. But the French cardinals annulled the results, claiming that the election would cause widespread riots and the assassination of several prominent bishops behind the Iron Curtain. The next source is best-selling author, Jesuit, and former papal advisor, Father Malachi Martin. In an interview in the late 90s, Father Martin was asked if there was any truth to the rumors that Cardinal Siri was elected pope. Father Martin gives a very frank response.
The truth is, he got sufficient votes twice to become pope in two conclaves. But he refused it. At least two, if not three. But he refused it. And he made quite clear, talking to us after those two conclaves, that yes, the votes were there, but he refused to take them. He refused to take them.
When the interviewer asks why Siri refused, Martin says,
I think mainly out of fear. I think his family was at stake. He was a Genovese family. They were fishermen originally, very extensive family. And he felt that there was too much physical and social danger for his family if he bucked the system. And remember that the two conclaves I'm talking about is the conclave of 1958, which elected John the 23rd, and the conclave of June 1963, which elected Paul VI. And they were very political conclaves.
The interviewer then asks if Siri refused because he thought he could not be an effective pope.
No, he felt that they wouldn't let him live. They were bent, remember the whole thing was planned. They were bent on changing the church.
And you see, as I mentioned before, the whole thing about the shedding of the blood of the martyrs, the Pope in his exile dying a cruel death, this is all being showcased here by the fact that the Pope, Siri, believed that basically if he were to, publicly make it known that he was elected Pope and all this kind of stuff, he would be assassinated, right? His family would be potentially killed. There are reports about these dark forces threatening to bomb the Vatican or threatening to bomb Rome, that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of intimidation causing great fear to stifle the public proclamation or the public exercise of the papacy. And of course, he mentions here that Siri, according to him, Siri said he refused it, that kind of stuff. And there are reports of people who would ask Siri if he was the Pope and he'd deny it and stuff like that. And I think even with Father Trans, we're going to talk about later, when he initially asked Siri if he was the Pope, he tried to deny it and, tried to dodge the question and that kind of stuff, or not admit that he was elected. But as Tran kept pressing him, he eventually admitted, yes, I'm the Pope. You know what I mean? He had eventually admitted it, something like that. We're going to cover that stuff later. My details may be a bit hazy, but for a while, Siri kept it secret, the fact that he was elected Pope, and only people who were perhaps there or had some kind of direct communication with those who were there would be would know about this kind of thing. And as far as remember, Melanie of La Salette said that at first, we will not know which is the true Pope. You understand? And so this whole thing with Siri hiding the fact that he was the Pope, not admitting that he was in fact Pope Gregory the 17th and all that kind of stuff, is consistent with what Melanie of La Salette said about us not knowing who the true Pope is at first.
They weren't going to allow Siri in, because everybody knew what Siri would do. He simply, the whole thing was planned. They were bent on changing the church. And they weren't going to allow Siri in, because everybody knew what Siri would do. He simply put on his coat mail, he'd take his battle-axe and go out and cut off heads. Siri would not make a compromise. So I think that he said, no, I can't do that because my family will suffer. And he has a large family. So he wouldn't do it. The whole thing was planned. 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 The whole thing was planned.
Despite the events of Sunday, October 26th, the conclave continued. 2 days later, on October 28th, the predetermined candidate, Angelo Roncalli, emerged as so-called Pope.
The conclave of cardinals has reached an agreement. The ancient signal to the world comes from the Sistine Chapel. Habemus Papam. We have a Pope, in the traditional phrase of centuries. The throngs who have waited in the square of St. Peter's rejoice with 500 million Catholics around the world. Elevated to the papacy, Angelo Giuseppe Cardinal Roncalli, shortly before his 77th birthday. Chosen after one of the shortest electoral conclaves in 600 years, he will reign as Pope John the 23rd, first pontiff to assume the name John since the 14th century. By the time the new head of the church appeared on the balcony of St. Peter's, one of the greatest crowds in Vatican history, over 400,000 jammed the square, with traffic snarling.
It's so sad to see these people, and he said over 200,000 people were there and stuff. I don't know if over 200,000 were there the following days as well, but all these people celebrating, oh, we have a Pope, and they're happy and stuff, and having no idea that the devil has just installed a satanic anti-Pope bent on leading them all into eternal darkness.
For miles around are those hurrying to be present. One of his first acts as Pope was to deliver an appeal for world.
But of course, is our situation is very horrible. Of course, obviously. And for me, of course, it is a great source of agony, frustration, stress, torment. But then at the same time, I admire God's justice. I respect God's chastisement of the world, because basically, from my understanding, the main reason God has done this, allowed this to happen, is because people became tepid, their faith became weak, their zeal became weak, their morals degraded, people became more and more godless and stuff like that. And as a way to punish the world, God has taken the truth from them. God has allowed them to wallow away in darkness and perish forever, because they have not appreciated his church. They didn't appreciate having real mass. They didn't appreciate having the true faith. They didn't appreciate having a true Pope. They didn't appreciate what God had gifted to them. And so as punishment, God has now taken it away. And if you see how godless and horrible the world is, you're like, yeah, like I can totally see the world doesn't deserve to have a true pope in Rome. The world doesn't deserve to have access to the truth. The world doesn't deserve all of these extraordinary blessings that God used to give to the world, you know? So in that way, I can see how the world is deserving of God's punishment and deserving of being abandoned by God and left to suffer in darkness. So I admire that aspect of God's judgment and God's justice, God determining to punish the world for its wickedness and to basically abandon them for not appreciating what he was doing for them. I can totally see that, and I respect it. I respect God's justice in this matter. Although for me, of course, I'm also deprived of the Pope being in Rome. I'm deprived of a real mass. I'm deprived of access to a real priest and stuff like that. But if I have to suffer along with the world in order for God's justice to be implemented and for God to exercise the punishment he deems necessary for the world, I respect that and I appreciate it. And as long as God wants me to suffer through it, I will have to suffer through it. All I ask is that he gives me the grace to suffer well, okay? And of course, doesn't send me to hell in the end.
Peace, this being after his initial appearance and delivery of the papal benediction to the throngs present to acclaim him.
All right, hold on. Let me see what was the next part? Okay, so I went from part 4 to part 9. All right, so I skipped a bunch of parts because it probably had a bunch of stuff that I didn't agree with and I didn't want to show those videos here. Remove that garbage. Remove that trash, please. Why can't you say he hate this kind of nonsense? How YouTube has this thing here? It's probably because this person there's a feature when you upload a video on YouTube, they have a feature called automatic concepts and stuff like that, where YouTube will automatically explain certain things in the video. I don't, as far as I'm aware, I don't turn that on for any video because I don't want YouTube saying some stupidness at the bottom of my video or in my videos or whatever. But let me just give me a second because I've been recording for a while and I think I need to take just a brief break. All right, continuing now.
Pope Paul VI died on August 6th.
You see, this kind of stuff, this is the kind of stuff this is why I put that disclaimer at the beginning about clarifying stuff I don't agree with. I don't know why this guy is claiming correctly that these people are anti-popes, not validly elected, and yet he's still calling them popes. You see what I mean? That kind of nonsense. If the person is an anti-pope, why are you calling him Pope Paul VI? He was anti-Pope Paul VI. So that kind of stupidness really just disgusts me, honestly. Call him an anti-Pope. You're even claiming in your videos he's an anti-Pope and still calling him Pope.
1978. On August 26th, Cardinal Albino Luciani was elected Pope. He took the name John Paul I.
Once again, elected Pope. No, he wasn't. He was an anti-pope, which is the whole point of your videos. Oh my goodness, man.
John in honor of John 23rd and Paul in honor of Paul VI. He was an ardent feminist and was known to refer to God publicly in the feminine. He refused to be crowned pope and planned to melt down the papal tiara and sell it for the poor. He also planned something else no one expected. He planned to rid the Vatican hierarchy of members of the P2 Masonic Lodge by appointing them to obscure posts in far-off lands. His big mistake was meeting the Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Vilo, also pegged for dismissal, to discuss the plans. The fateful meeting is recounted briefly in this Italian documentary, The Last Days of John Paul I.
Alle 18:30 arriva nell'appartamento.
At the 6:30 p.m., I guess it means at 6:30 p.m. The Secretary of State, J. Vilo, talks with so-called the Pope for 1 hour.
Il segretario di Stato, Jean Villot. si intrattiene con il Papa più di un'ora. All'ordine
To the agenda, nominations and substitutions.
del giorno sembra nomine, spostamenti, sostituzioni. Sembra
It seems there is a frank exchange of opinions.
ci sia un franco scambio di opinioni.
The next morning at 4:30 a.m., the Pope was discovered dead by his housekeeper, Sister Vicenza, on the 33rd day of his pontificate. She summoned the Secretary of State, Cardinal Villot, who upon entering the room, removed a bottle of medication that was next to the Pope's bed, as well as the Pope's final will, and a recently drawn-up document detailing who would be purged from the hierarchy.
Once again, the whole point of this guy's videos is that these people were not properly elected. They weren't real popes, right? So then what are you talking about? You're saying like, oh, remove the stuff from next to the Pope's bed. From an anti-Pope's bed. Not the Pope's bed. An anti-Pope's bed.
These items would never be seen again. Cardinal Villot proceeded to have the Pope's body embalmed so that no autopsy could be done. He then lied about virtually every aspect of the event and would meet his own death only 6 months later. And what does this have to do with Cardinal Siri? It shows that criminal elements are so entrenched in the Vatican that it is virtually impossible for a real pope to ascend to the papal throne and do what needs to be done. It also gives us an indication of how long Cardinal Siri would have lived had he taken office and tried to clean house and restore the church. Which brings us to our next subject, the October 1978 conclave, where Cardinal Siri is elected again and put under duress, and the exclusive interview he gave on the eve of the conclave, detailing what he would do if elected. In October 1978, 20 years after he was first elected Pope and prevented from exercising his office, Cardinal Siri will enter the conclave for the fourth and final time. In the days leading up to the conclave,
Sorry, I kind of like blanked out there. Hold on. I was thinking about something.
In October 1978, 20 years after he was first elected Pope and prevented from exercising his office, Cardinal Siri will enter the conclave for the fourth and final time. In the days leading up to the conclave, Cardinal Siri is portrayed negatively in the media. It is repeatedly reported to an emotional public that he criticized the recently deceased Pope John Paul I, with major publications like Time and Newsweek joining in on cue. One has to wonder how organized and powerful a force it was that wished to prevent Cardinal Siri from taking the papal chair and restoring order in the church.
See what he mentioned there about how powerful the force was against Siri? It's like, oh my goodness, like, as I mentioned before, man, when you see the prophecy section, there's no doubt. Like, it's just, I don't see how it's possible that so many of these prophecies are not talking about Siri. Even the whole point of like, because I think one of the prophecies by Mary Julie Jehani has the Lord said to her, basically there'll be like a revolution and there'll be like a storm that this Pope has to do with, like such an overwhelming force of evil. And you see it here with like where he says all the newspapers and the magazines and stuff are all against him and stuff. And like, that's the thing with like, if you look into like, you know, conspiracy theories and stuff about how the world is run and all that kind of stuff behind the scenes, Freemasons, you know, communists, globalists, Jews, all this stuff, they run the world without making it clear that they run the world. You understand? They like to be in the shadows, like to be in darkness. As the Lord said, those who work evil like the darkness. They like to be in the night. You understand? They like to not be seen clearly working their evil. So there was an overwhelming storm of evil that this one man would have to fight. You understand? And our situation, as I mentioned before, our situation is so horrible, so dire. There is such an overwhelming force of evil running the world and persecuting the church that I don't see how it could be resolved. I don't see how it could be resolved without God himself supernaturally intervening. Okay? There's something like Sodom and Gomorrah, where he destroyed the whole city. Something like Noah's flood, where he destroyed most of the earth. Most of the people in the world were killed except 8 people, right? Something like that, I can totally see how something like that is basically what is necessary. That is what is necessary. God has to wipe out most of the world. And that is what the 3 days of darkness is prophesied to be. Basically, like either 3/4 or 4/3 of the world being completely killed by God, raining down fire from heaven, unleashing demons from hell, natural disasters, all this kind of stuff. Just completely wiping the world out. And I pray for that basically every day of my life. Basically every day I beg God, please destroy the world. I beg you. Please, sir. Please destroy this godless world. Please destroy it. Oh, something kind of funny? You know how those who've like seen Batman and stuff or might know this quote? There's a quote from Batman, I think by the butler Alfred, where he said like to Bruce Wayne, he was like, Master Wayne, there are some people who some men just like to see the world burn, Master Wayne, or something like that. Some men would just like to see the world burn. Yeah, I'm one of those men. I'm one of the men who love to see the world burn. I want the world to be destroyed, just like Noah's flood. Why? Because the world's completely godless and it needs to be cleansed. It needs to be purged of all this wickedness. So I am one of those men, according to Alfred, who just wants to see the world burn. Yes. Some men just want to see the world burn, Master Wayne. Yes, I'm one of those men. Was that from my computer or the video?
Then, on the eve of the conclave, Cardinal Siri gave an exclusive interview to a reporter from the Turin newspaper. The reporter agreed not to run the story until after the conclave was over. However, the story appeared on the front page of the newspaper the following morning and was delivered to each of the cardinals before they entered the conclave. The opening paragraph of the article explained what Cardinal Siri intended to do if elected: revoke the disastrous changes of John the 23rd and Paul the 6th. After the conclave, it was widely reported that it had been this interview that prevented Siri from becoming pope and cleared the way for the election of John Paul II. But was it really?
Habemus Papam. Sancte Hermane Ecclesiae Cardinalem Doitiva.
More revelation on the extent to which a Siri papacy was sabotaged was given by Vatican insider Malachi Martin in one of his final interviews. In the interview, Father Martin was asked about who else could have been elected instead of John Paul II, and the audience is treated to a most shocking reply.
Instead of John Paul II, he had the choice of Cardinal Siri of Genova, who would have done exactly what I would do. And he was elected Pope. He got the votes in the same conclave in October 1978, and he was told by a little handwritten note that if he accepted, he would die, that his family would die. So he refused the pontificate.
All right, let's go on to the next part. Part 10, Siri confronted.
After the conclaves, it is known that Cardinal Siri was approached on at least 2 occasions and asked whether he was elected Pope. The first instance took place on May 18, 1985, when French Catholic writer Louis Hubert Remy, along with 2 associates, met with Cardinal Siri for a 2-hour conversation. Remy recounts the meeting in an article. Of concern to us, as arranged the evening before, was to speak, first of all, about rumors that Cardinal Tisserant had left the conclave. When we recalled this fact, the reaction of Cardinal Siri was clear, precise, firm, and unquestionable. No, no one left the conclave, responded Cardinal Siri. Some moments later, when we asked him whether he had been elected Pope, his reaction was completely different. He started by remaining silent for a long time, then raised his eyes to heaven with an appearance of suffering and pain, and weighing each word with gravity said, "I am bound by the secret." Then, after a long silence, he said again, "I am bound by the secret. This secret is horrible. I would have books to write about the different conclaves. Very serious things have taken place, but I can say nothing." What is important to note here is that Cardinal Siri responded very directly to the first question about the conclave. Then, when asked if he was elected Pope, responds, "I am bound by the secret." But why not just respond, "No, I was never elected Pope"? Surely, if he was not elected Pope, there would be no harm in stating so. The second meeting that we know of took place on June 13th.
Yeah, because notice that when asked if Tisserand left the conclave, he's like, no one left the conclave. When asked if he was the Pope, he looks to heaven, he weighs his words heavily, and he says, "I am bound by the secret." If he wasn't elected Pope, he'd just say, "No, I wasn't elected Pope." Because I mean, whether someone left the conclave or whether you're elected Pope, I would think those are both things that would be, contained under the parameters of the secret, right? But to the question about if anyone left the conclave, no one left the conclave. But regarding whether he was elected Pope, the answer was much more severe and much more heavily weighed and contemplated, right? Oh, this thing keeps popping up.
1988. The second meeting that we know of took place on June 13th, 1988. A Vietnamese priest named Father Cote traveled to Genoa to visit Cardinal Siri on behalf of a group of Catholics from Texas, with the intention of asking him if he was elected Pope. After locating Cardinal Siri, Father Cote asked him if he had been elected Pope. Cardinal Siri said no at least twice. Then Father Cote added some pressure, telling Siri that if he had done his job, his family would not have been killed by the communists. At this point, Siri became stricken, and Father Cote asked him more explicitly, "You are the Pope, not the recognized Pope, but the lawful Pope," to which Siri responded, "You already know it." This answer will call to mind the words of Christ when asked by Pilate if he was the King of the Jews, to which Christ responded, "Thou sayest it."
Yeah, that's some heavy stuff. Let's see here, part 10. Then is there any other part? Okay, part 11. Yeah, so of course, this person they seem to be unaware of what happened after with Father Cote and Pope Gregory the 17th, like all the secret meetings and elevating cardinals and stuff. This person seems not to be aware of that. Their videos, I don't think any of their videos covered that at all. So, yeah. I'm just kind of like, I'm kind of pausing and like, just, I guess, feeling tremendous sorrow at what he just mentioned, like when he said, "You already know it," the whole situation, man, is so horrible. It is so horrible. Let's play this part 11. I think this should be the last one because it's literally called conclusion, right? Make sure I close this stuff again. Okay. All right.
We will now try to break down the elements of this 30-year period to arrive at a conclusion regarding the papal election of Cardinal Giuseppe Siri. On the evening of Sunday, October 26th, at the 1958 conclave, an unambiguous 5-minute signal indicated that a pope had been chosen.
Oh, I wanted to mention too, regarding the white smoke, right? to me, the fact that the smoke was white for such a long time, and then it turned black, that is also potentially like a sign from God that basically the Vatican has been overtaken by darkness, right? You have a real pope, the white smoke, but then his papacy has been suppressed by the devil, and the smoke turning black in this case signifies that, right? The white smoke is now gone, and all you have left is a black smoke, you know? So to me, that's kind of like a symbolic sign there regarding that specific day, right? The white smoke turning black. Of course, that's the usual like process if an election didn't happen and stuff. But in this specific case, to me, it's kind of like a visual sign as well of what happened, right? A real pope was elected, but then the devil intimidated him into not publicly accepting his papacy. And of course, the devil is associated with darkness. And so the smoke turned black, right?
We are supposed to believe that this was a mistake, that men who operated this level in the church hierarchy could make a blunder of this magnitude in a straightforward and simple procedure. Angelo Roncalli, who became Pope 2 days after this event, upon his election, put the church on a well-designed long-range plan to destruction. Again, we are supposed to believe that this was done by mistake. Moreover, as we covered in Part 3, there are several people who knew that Cardinal Roncalli would become Pope before the 1958 conclave, which shows that the whole thing was planned long in advance. In light of this, it isn't hard to conclude that the white smoke of Sunday evening was intended as such, and that the true Pope was elected that night. So, who was it? There are two separate individuals, one with a background in intelligence, the other a Jesuit and formal papal advisor, who were on record saying it was Cardinal Siri who was elected Pope at this conclave. There is also Cardinal Siri's indirect admission on 2 occasions that he was elected Pope. In addition, Cardinal Siri's success at the next 3 conclaves, his adherence to church traditions of the last 2,000 years, and his published remarks that he would condemn Vatican II indicate that it was indeed Cardinal Siri who was elected, as opposed to any other candidate. Furthermore, it is important to note that the white smoke is never released unless the candidate has previously accepted the office, has taken his papal name, and has begun to receive the obeisances of the cardinals there present. This means that once a man has been elected, the only way he cannot be a pope is if he goes through a very formal, public resignation of his office, or dies.
And we're going to cover this later in this section, but another point to make here is that if someone, basically according to the 1917 Code of Canon Law, resignation is invalid if it is imposed upon the person through fear. So even if Pope Gregory the 17th, said, okay, resign, because he doesn't want to be killed, or his family doesn't want to be killed, or whatever, that would make it invalid, and he would still be the Pope because he didn't resign of his own free will, but he resigned due to fear and death threats being imposed upon him. But we're going to cover that more later in this section.
If after his election, he is then threatened or otherwise coerced into attempting to resign his office, that resignation is absolutely null and void, and he remains the true Pope.
Right, that's what I just said. So yeah, this guy actually covered that point. But we're going to cover it in more detail.
Thus, beyond a reasonable doubt, Cardinal Siri was the man elected Pope on Sunday, October 26, 1958, and remained Pope until his death on May 2nd, 1989. And this concludes the presentation on Cardinal Giuseppe Siri. Perhaps more will come to light as more people learn about these events. Perhaps one day it will be recognized universally that Cardinal Siri was in fact the true Pope, and the last 5 popes and all their innovations and heresies will be thoroughly condemned forever.
You can hear that last part again.
Here's in fact one day, perhaps And this concludes the presentation on Cardinal Giuseppe Siri. Perhaps more will come to light as more people learn about these events. Perhaps one day it will be recognized universally that Cardinal Siri was in fact the true Pope, and the last 5 popes and all their innovations and heresies will be thoroughly condemned forever.
And you see, once again, the guy literally says all their innovations and heresies and still calls them popes. Oh my goodness, dude, I can't. Oh, this is why I almost never watch any religious videos made by people who don't believe the truth, because even their language is so disgusting and infuriating. You know they're taught heresy. You know they try to innovate with a bunch of modernist garbage, and yet you insist on calling them popes. Oh my goodness. But yeah, I think there's also a prophecy talking about basically there being some basically the greatest council in church history after the, basically during the age of peace, there being this extremely incredible council and stuff like that. So God willing, one day there will be a council held by the church, a tremendous and wonderful council, which will condemn all these anti-popes, condemn all their heresies, and recognize that Gregory the 17th, Giuseppe Siri, was the real Pope. Gregory the 18th was his true successor, and so on, So God willing, one day we will see that. If I live to see it, that'd be really great, Man. All right. So let's move on now to the next. Hold on. All right. So the next thing we're going to cover here is basically defending the papacy of Pope Gregory the 17th. Because, of course, there are going to be Sedevacantists, SSPX, whoever they are, that will make a bunch of false claims about his papacy, about why he wasn't the Pope. They will claim he lost the papacy, all this kind of stuff. So we're going to cover all of that and basically defend the papacy of Pope Gregory the 17th from these errors and false claims by these people, okay? Because as I mentioned before, with the Catholic faith, it is not only necessary to profess the truth, but it is necessary to be able to defend the truth, right? And of course, not every single person is called by God to be, intellectually or academically equipped with the necessary information and understanding to defend the Pope and defend the church effectively from heresy and error and false claims and stuff. But some people are. And so today we're going to be getting into that. Okay. First, you see this image here, Pope Pius XII with his hand-picked successor, the future Pope Gregory the 17th, circa 1955 AD. All right, so Pius XII and Gregory the 17th, 2 popes right there, well, at least one being a future pope at that time. A prelate, this is entitled, When Does Someone Become Pope? A prelate becomes pope as soon as he accepts the election. Okay? As soon as he accepts, from that moment, he's a pope. There's a quote here. If a candidate received the 2/3 vote, the cardinal dean approaches the newly elected pontiff and asks him whether he will accept the election and by what name he wishes to be known. If he accepts, all the cardinals arise and the canopies of all the chairs are lowered except that of the Pope, who is conducted behind the altar where he is clothed in the papal garments. The person thus elected Pope acquires full jurisdiction over the universal church immediately on consenting and becomes the vicar of Christ on earth. This is from Daniel M. Gallagher, Imprimatur 1917 AD, pages 106 to 107. So The fact that Giuseppe Siri chose the name Gregory the 17th is proof that he accepted his election and became Pope. Okay? Now, did Gregory the 17th lose the papacy? There are two principal arguments people may bring up to argue that Gregory the 17th lost the papacy, because some people will claim that he was elected Pope, he did become the Pope, but he lost the papacy, right? The first principal argument is that he resigned and therefore was no longer Pope. The second is that since he publicly acknowledged the anti-popes and participated in Vatican II or other religious activities with them, he lost the papacy due to being a heretic. Okay? We will now address both of these false arguments. Regarding resignation, any abdication of the papacy, which Gregory the 17th made in the 1958 conclave due to threats, etc., would be null, void, and worthless. He would still remain the Pope. Why? Because resignation due to fear imposed on the prelate is invalid. This is the 1917 Code of Canon Law, Canon 185. Resignation is invalid by law if it was made out of grave fear unjustly inflicted, or from fraud, substantial error, or simony. Okay? So as I mentioned before, if Gregory the 17th tried to resign from his papacy due to the death threats and the little, I think the little note was in the 1978 one, I think, right? According to that Malachi Martin guy. But if the Pope in 1958, for example, in that conclave, tried to resign from his papacy due to like death threats or intimidation and that kind of stuff, that would make his resignation invalid. Okay, he would still actually be the Pope, even if he says like, I'm not the Pope anymore, I resigned. He would still be the Pope because the reason he attempted to resign was due to death threats and or grave fear unjustly inflicted. Yeah. All right. Now, regarding the argument that Pope Gregory the 17th was a public heretic and therefore lost his office, the element of imposed fear also needs to be heavily considered. Why? Because if one acts contrary to the faith out of fear, but inwardly retains one's Catholic faith, one is not a formal heretic. Okay? That person is not a formal heretic. There is also a pope from the past who did something similar out of fear, and we will talk about him later. Also, as you saw in the videos, Pope Gregory the 17th publicly said that he would undo the Vatican II changes, and according to the popeinred.com, he did not support any of them. He did not support any of them, but actually kept Genoa faithful to Catholic tradition. Here is an excerpt on the popeinred.com defending the Pope from the attacks of John Veneri. Quote, I'm going to quote this whole excerpt now. It is unthinkable to John Veneri that if Pope Gregory XVII were the true Pope, then he would never have signed the Vatican II Council decrees. Yet he stated, "We will not be bound by these decrees." Those who can see, please note the royal "we" in the Holy Father's statement. This is the way the popes of old would speak. Another important clue that his signature was coerced and that his own authority took precedence over the anti-papacy and the anti-council. Okay? They're saying this is another important clue that his signature was coerced and that his own authority took precedence over the anti-papacy and the anti-council. It is unthinkable to John Veneri that if Pope Gregory XVII was the true Pope, he would have adopted the reforms of the anti-council, celebrated the Novus Ordo Missae, ordained priests in the new rite, and consecrated bishops in the new rite. But it is thinkable to John Veneri that the man who substituted a new modernist religion for the ancient faith, new sacraments, and extinguished the sacrament of orders under the seal of the fisherman's ring was the true Pope. Okay? So he's basically saying here, to John Veneri, it is absurd to say that the true Pope, would go along with Vatican II or ordain people in the new rite and all this kind of stuff. But it is thinkable and it makes sense that the new Pope would basically carry out a modernist revolution. And let's see, that's the end of the quote there. No, it continues. It says, the Pope in red website cites evidence that Pope Gregory XVII resisted all of this. Walter Matt's remnant newspaper reported that in Genoa, where Pope Gregory presided as Cardinal Archbishop in official capacity, churches looked the same in 1989 as they had in 1940. Priests offered Mass facing the altars with no conciliar Masonic table of the book in sight. There is evidence he covertly ordained priests for the church in eclipse, as the sacrament of orders had been extinguished in the Novus Ordo. He said again, as the sacrament of orders had been extinguished in the Novus Ordo, the significance of this can hardly be understated. However, it is also clear that he had great remorse over the compromises that he made to fulfill the goals of his papacy. Regarding one not being a formal heretic if acting out of fear, right? This is a quote from Father Dominic Prummer, his Handbook of Moral Theology, Chapter 3, Article 2, Apostasy and Heresy, number 202. It says, heresy, considered objectively, is a proposition that contradicts an article of faith. In its subjective and formal aspect, heresy is the pertinacious error of a Christian who repudiates some truth of the Catholic faith. Therefore, for formal heresy, there is required error in the intellect and pertinacity in the will. Consequently, the following are not formal heretics. A, those who from fear or some other motive make an external denial of faith while inwardly preserving their consent to it. Okay? So people who say that Gregory XVII was not the Pope or lost the papacy and stuff because he was seen, with the anti-popes or with the Vatican II people and all that kind of stuff, do not sufficiently consider the case of someone who is acting out of fear, okay, while inwardly preserving their Catholic faith. And we're going to see in the future in this presentation that there was actually another Pope in church history who did something very similar. Here we go. Pope Saint Marcellinus sacrificed to idols out of fear, right? But according to Saint Robert Bellarmine, since he did this out of fear and not because he was a true heretic, he did not lose the papacy. Here's the quote. It says, Saint Robert Bellarmine, writing on the errors falsely ascribed to older... I messed up my words. Saint Robert Bellarmine, writing on the errors falsely ascribed to early popes, said, quote, the 10th is Pope Marcellinus, who sacrificed to idols, as is certain from the Pontifical of Damascus, the Council of St. Visanus, and from the Epistle of Nicholas I to the Emperor Michael. But Marcellinus neither taught something against faith, nor was a heretic or unfaithful, except by an external act on account of the fear of death. Now, whether he fell from the pontificate due to that external act or not, little is related. Later, he abdicated the pontificate and shortly thereafter was crowned with martyrdom. Still, I believe that he would not have fallen from the pontificate ipso facto, because it was certain to all that he sacrificed to idols only out of fear. Okay? So someone acting out of fear is a very important detail to consider when making a claim, for example, that Giuseppe Siri was not the Pope due to certain actions that he did or public things you saw him involved with. Okay? Acting out of fear nullifies a lot of stuff, right? It basically does not make the person a formal heretic. According to St. Robert Bellarmine here, it does not make the person ipso facto lose the papacy because they're acting out of fear, right? And this is from On the Roman Pontiff, Book 4, Chapter 8. Now, TCW had a webpage about Pope St. Marcellinus, but the link is currently down. Here are excerpts about it from an email I sent to someone a while ago. So when I made these slides, I think TCW's website was having some issues. I don't know if the link is there now. I can look for it. In fact, let me try and see if I can find it right now. All right, I found it. So it's here now. The article is entitled Moot If Hostage Pope Gregory XVII, Syrie Said New Mass. Okay. Let's zoom in here. April 26th, Feast of Pope St. Marcellinus. Some uncatechized and are willfully ignorant people have tried to say that Pope Gregory XVII, 1958 and 1989, who was under grave duress for 30 years by the Freemasons, lost his papacy for possibly offering the reprobate New Order Mass. Please see the Catholic historical precedent of another prisoner pope who had his free will impeded by satanic persecutors, His Holiness Pope St. Marcellinus, whose feast it is today. The Roman Breviary reads on April 5th, during the cruel persecution of the Emperor Diocletian, Marcellinus of Rome, overcome with terror, offered incense to the idols of the gods. For this sin he did penance, and wearing a hair shirt, went to the council of Sinueso, where many bishops had assembled, and there openly confessed his crime. Note, this act did not constitute the loss of the papacy, since it was done under grave duress at the time. Pope St. Marcellinus is listed obviously on the official list of popes. St. Thomas Aquinas teaches, in order to constitute a genuine true act of the will, the act must be performed spontaneously, freely, without constraint or force, and that man can be coerced or forced to do something against his will in two ways, by violence and by fear. That which is done under exterior violence is wholly involuntary. The life of St. Marcellinus, Pope and Martyr, died in 304 AD. Pope Marcellinus ruled the Church of Rome for 9 years and 4 months. By order of Emperors Diocletian and Maximin, he was taken prisoner and brought forward to offer sacrifice to the idols. At first he refused and was threatened with various kinds of torture, and for fear of the threatened suffering, he put down 2 grains of incense in sacrifice to the gods. This gave great joy to the infidels, but caused the faithful immense sadness. However, under a weak head, members rise up and make little of the threats of the princes, so the faithful came to the Pope and reproached him severely. He realized the gravity of his error and offered himself to be judged by a council of bishops. The bishops responded, "It is not possible for the Supreme Pontiff to be judged by anyone, but you yourself weigh your case in your own mind and pronounce your own judgment." The Pope, repentant, lamented his fault and deposed himself, but the whole gathering immediately re-elected him. When the emperors heard of this, they had him arrested again. He absolutely refused to offer sacrifice to the idols, so they sentenced him to be beheaded. Then the persecution was renewed with such a fury that in 1 month, 17,000 Christians were put to death. Note, and when it says here, Christians, this is referring to only Catholics, okay, not talking about heretics. Because you see like Protestants and stuff, they would talk about church history and like, oh, Christians were killed in the Colosseum and stuff, talking as if like they represent these Christians today. You are heretics. The people who are being put to death in the Colosseum were Catholics, right? You are the enemy of those people, but they act as if like they are like this Christian, they're their descendants or their successors in terms of Christianity and stuff. And it's like, that's not your history, my guy. That's Catholic history. It's not your history. Your history is Martin Luther talking a bunch of blasphemous filth. That's your history. Our history is all the way back to the Colosseum and, of course, back to the apostles. That's Catholic history. So I hate to see Protestants talking about church history as if like they're like real Christians. Anyways, continuing. Note, Pope Marcellinus did not ipso facto lose his office as Pope. He weighed his own specific case in his own mind and then judged to depose himself, but was immediately re-elected. TCW learned in 2006 that Pope Gregory XVII, Syrie, in discussing with trusted clergy in the spring of 1988 concerning his own lethal duress situation, concurred with them that as he was not a free moral agent to act due to his being a captive of the Freemasons, it removes culpability for his seeming transgressions against the faith. such as attending the apostate V2 council or presiding in public gatherings staged by the anti-popes. When Marcellinus was about to be beheaded, he declared himself unworthy of Christian burial and excommunicated all who might presume to bury him. Thus his body lay above ground for 35 days. At the end of that time, the Apostle Peter appeared to Marcellus, who had succeeded as Pope, and said, Brother Marcellus, why do you not bury me? Marcellus replied, Have you not yet been buried, my lord? Peter said, I consider myself unburied as long as Marcellinus is unburied. Marcellus replied, But don't you know, my lord? Marcellus asked, that he laid a curse on anyone who buried him? Peter responded, Is it not written that he who humbles himself shall be exalted? You should have kept this in mind. Now go and bury him at my feet. Marcellus went straight away and carried out the orders laudably. From Blessed Jacobus of Voragines' sacred Legenda Aurea, circa 1260 AD. And this is a quote from Bishop Whitman here. Violent hands will be laid on the supreme head of the Catholic Church. Yes, the flock will become small, okay? Small. So that is about Pope St. Marcellinus there, okay? There's an article about him. Let's go back to the slides now. So we just read through this, so I don't need to read this again. Let's see. All right. Yeah. All right. So in many ways, we can say that the papacy of Gregory XVII was an extended version of what happened to Pope St. Marcellinus. Pope St. Marcellinus acted against his will for a short time. Pope Gregory XVII acted against his will for decades. Let's see. I'm trying to think. Hold on. Yeah, so this one I wasn't able to find the article for this, but let me just read what it says here. I can't find the webpage again, but on TCW's website, I believe they mentioned a situation in church history where a pope was imprisoned and presumed to have died in captivity. Then a new, quote unquote, pope was elected, but then the true pope was discovered to still be alive, and the pope wrongly acknowledged the anti-pope as pope before he once again acknowledged that he was still the pope. Okay, so there have been many situations in church history where like who the pope was very confusing and stuff like that. This is not the first time this has happened. Like the Western Schism, for example, right? Probably, I guess, the most confusing one of all. So this is not a new kind of situation as far as not being sure who the true pope is, or the true pope acknowledging an anti-pope when he's actually the true pope and stuff like that. This stuff has happened before. Now, regarding the declassified documents mentioned in the video documentary kind of thing we watched earlier, I was unable to obtain these documents, okay, or the specific ones I'm going to mention here. I submitted a FOIA request in October 2023 for declassified U.S. Department of State Secret Dispatch, John 23rd, issue date November 20th, 1958, declassified November 11th, 1974, and U.S. Department of State Secret File Cardinal Siri, issue date April 10th, 1961, declassified February 28th, 1994. This information was taken from the popeinred.com, right? After waiting several months with no follow-up, I decided to call, and a representative told me I would receive an acknowledgement of my request soon. I received that acknowledgement via email on January 31st, 2024. The acknowledgement stated, "This email acknowledges receipt of your October 3rd, 2023 Freedom of Information Act FOIA request received by the U.S. Department of State, Office of Information Programs and Services on October 3rd, 2023. You are seeking a copy of the same documents I mentioned just now." And it says, date range for record, search from November 20th, 1958 to February 28th, 1994. Unless you advise otherwise, we will treat as non-responsive any compilations of publicly available news reports and any publicly available documents not created by the U.S. government, such as mass distribution emails from news media. This office assigned your request the subject reference number and placed it in the complex processing track where it will be processed as quickly as possible. See this here? This office will not be able to respond within the 20 days provided by the statute due to unusual circumstances. In this instance, the unusual circumstances include the need to search for and collect requested records from other department offices or foreign service posts. On February 20th, 2024, I received a letter via email from the State Department stating this. This email correspondence responds to your, I think it's like a typo, right? That I think they actually typed a typo in the email, I think. But anyways, this email correspondence responds to your October 3rd, 2023 FOIA request received by the U.S. Department of State, Office of Information Programs and Services on October 3rd, 2023. You are seeking the following documents, continuing. And then it says, based on the original request you provided, we do not have reason to believe the Department of State has records responsive to your request. Accordingly, we are administratively closing the request. Furthermore, we suggest that you contact the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA, which may have the information you are seeking. This recommendation is based on our knowledge of the requested records and should not serve as confirmation that NARA is in possession of those records. Please note that while NARA is the nation's record keeper, less than 3% of all records created by the United States government are determined to be of such significant historical value that they are kept by NARA forever. I then contacted NARA and someone replied saying, this is in response to your February 20th, 2024 FOIA request about 2 Department of State documents. We received your request on February 23rd. In order to locate a specific telegram, airgram, or dispatch, they misspelled dispatch there. It said dispatch, but it's dispatch, sent to the Department of State, in addition to the date of the document, we need to know the U.S. Foreign Service post that sent it. We have searched the records in our custody, but we were unable to locate any information concerning a file entitled Cardinal Siri. If you are able to provide further bibliographic information about that file, we will be pleased to make another search. We do not consider this response a denial under the Freedom of Information Act because we cannot determine without more specific information whether the records you have requested exist. This concludes the processing of your request. I emailed one more time just to clarify the status of the John 23rd document because they mentioned the Cardinal Siri document, but not the John 23rd one, right? So I emailed one more time just to clarify the status of the John 23rd document and basically received the same response. So regarding these documents, I obviously don't know what U.S. Foreign Service post sent them or any other information. I saw a quote-unquote traditional Catholic website online which stated that they were unable to obtain these documents as well. So I'm not the only one who tried to get them, but was unable to obtain them. I also haven't heard from TCW via email in a long time, so it's not like I can ask them for more information. Okay, as I mentioned, I think I wrote this before I actually received an email from them, but since receiving those 2 emails, I've once again not heard from them for a long time, okay? However, on their websites, they have posted several declassified documents, one of which I think would be a great addition to this presentation. And if God willing, I'm able to talk to them more in the future, I would like them to also post the 2 documents I couldn't find if they have them. All right, so let's get into this now. The document that they have on their website that I think is very important to share with you all here, the document speaks of the US government being advised that it should influence certain cardinals in the 1958 conclave to bring about its own desired outcome. Okay, basically the US government being advised by someone to interfere or to try to influence the outcome of the conclave. Okay, and notice here on the side, we have an image of this, this is the American $1 bill, and this is George Washington, the first president of America, right? Notice the $1 bill says Novus Ordo Seclorum, and that means New World Order. That's what that means. So, there are conspiracy theories about the US government being run by Freemasons and stuff. Yes, I believe that is totally true because even a lot of American presidents through history have been Freemasons, okay? And the whole idea of there being a new age, a new order, a new world age, all that stuff, that is Freemason doctrine, okay? So what is the quote unquote new church called? It is called the Novus Ordo, the new order. It is Masonic. It is Freemasonry, right? The New World Order And now you have the New Order of Mass. Okay, it's a Freemason Mass. It's not a Catholic Mass. It's a Freemason false Mass. So, and George Washington was a Freemason. That's not even like hidden information. You can Google right now, was George Washington a Freemason? And it'll say, yes, he was a Freemason. Okay, so the first president of this country was a satanic Freemason. Okay, Freemasons believe that Lucifer is God and that kind of stuff. He was a Freemason, the first president of America. And that's why people say like Protestant heretics and stuff, like conspiracy theorist Protestants and stuff will say that like, oh, America was founded as a Christian nation and stuff. No, it wasn't. America was founded as a Freemasonic nation, okay, not a Christian nation. The whole idea that you can be whatever religion you want to be, you know, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of this, freedom of that, all this whole idea of freedom, that is Freemasonry, is even in the name, Freemasons, right? That all of that doctrine is Freemasonic doctrine, it's not Christianity. That is satanic, Luciferian, Freemason doctrine. So America was founded from its very beginning as a Freemason country, not as a Christian country. Okay, that's not true. And these heretics will always be like they say stuff like, oh, God supports freedom of speech or whatever. And I'm like, no, he doesn't. In the Old Testament, blasphemers were stoned to death. God doesn't support freedom of speech. How could you conclude that reading the Bible? How could you read the Bible and conclude that God supports freedom of speech when he literally commanded in the Old Testament that blasphemers should be put to death? That's speech, right? Blasphemy is speech. When you say a blasphemous thing, that's speech. God doesn't support free speech. Okay, that's heretical nonsense. And the Catholic Church is well known for burning heretics at the stake. Okay, so God doesn't support free speech, and his church doesn't support free speech. The whole idea of free speech and freedom of religion and all that stuff is anti-Christ. That's contrary to Christ. Christ doesn't support freedom of religion. Christ says you must believe in me or you're going to burn in hell. How can you conclude that means he supports freedom of religion? No. Okay, so continuing, and as anyone who is aware of what the U.S. Constitution teaches and the history of its presidents knows, the United States is a Masonic government. Okay, the U.S. government is a Masonic government, and many of its presidents have been publicly known Freemasons. People like George Washington and Franklin Roosevelt, for example, okay, were Freemasons, and this is publicly accepted information. The ideas of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, etc. are core tenets of the blasphemy that is Freemasonry. Note that the phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum first appeared on the US $1 bill in 1935. And who was president in 1935? Franklin Roosevelt, a Freemason. It is ironic because basically all Protestant conspiracy theorists speak about the Illuminati, Freemasons, etc. being like the evil secret rulers of the world and their primary enemies, but their religion of freedom of speech and all that stuff and worshiping the Constitution like it's a Bible is actually rooted in the teachings of Freemasons and the Illuminati. So the very people that they're claiming to fight, oh, we got to fight the New World Order, we got to do all that stuff, they believe the same religion as the New World Order. The Constitution is a Freemason document. That's what it is. It's not a Christian document. And you're claiming to fight the Freemasons and Illuminati and all this stuff while professing the same things that they profess. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of this, freedom of that. Being obsessed with this freedom thing. That's Freemasonry. Christianity, Catholicism, does not support freedom of speech or freedom of religion. In the Old Testament, God commanded that blasphemers be stoned to death. God does not support freedom of speech. The Catholic Church is well known for burning heretics at the stake. God's church does not support freedom of speech. So neither God nor his church support freedom of speech, either in the Old Testament or the New Testament. If you research the teaching of Freemasonry, actually, I believe, I was kind of thinking as I was typing, but I believe the Diamonds have a pretty well done series of videos on their channel about the matter. You'll see that the Catholic Church is basically the arch enemy of Freemasonry. and their number one target for destruction. Why? Because Freemasons are agents of the devil. They literally believe that Lucifer is God. They literally believe that the devil is God. Okay? And they believe that like the devil freed us from God in the garden. They believe the serpent is the good guy. That's what they think. I mean, we're imprisoned by God in the garden and the serpent freed us. That's what they believe. They are literally the children of the devil in a much more complete sense than most organizations. They literally believe that Lucifer is their savior. Okay? So let's now look at the declassified document that I was talking about earlier, with the US government being advised to interfere or try to influence the 1958 conclave. All right, here's the TCW article about the declassified document. It says, declassified document, US involved in 1958 conclave coup, which is short for, of course, like coup d'etat or, overthrowing government kind of thing. As mentioned last month, this is a post from a few years ago, I think. Let me see. It's from July 2013, okay? It says, as mentioned last month, TCW had visited the United States National Archives in DC and was able to obtain more than 200, many multi-paged, declassified documents concerning the Vatican and the US government and other countries' dealings, okay? The following is an example of one of these important documents. I'm going to open that after we read the whole article. It was sent by the U.S. Ambassador to Italy, James Zellerbach, stationed in Rome, to U.S. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles at the Department of State in Washington, D.C. The document is an incoming classified telegram sent October 11th, 1958, 15 days before the assembly of the October 26th, 1958 conclave. Zellerbach is passing along information obtained from a Vatican source, likely the traitor, quote-unquote, Cardinal Tisserant, about an active plot designed to control the outcome of the upcoming October 26, 1958 conclave. The fifth column informant indicates to U.S. intelligence that he and others in his cabal do not want certain cardinals like Siri to be elected pope. There is a clear request that Zellerbach convey the urgent message to Masonic Washington, D.C. leadership, to Masonic Washington, D.C. leadership, to put pressure, likely blackmail, on the American cardinals to block a Siri or other anti-Masonic papals or papals. I'm not sure how you say that word. Let's say papacy, okay? Note, Cardinal Tisserant, an occult Freemason, because I thought, isn't the word like papabiles? Like, I think, isn't a papabile like someone who is like basically expected to be a pope, like a strong candidate? I'm not sure, but that might be a typo. It might be meant to say papabiles instead of papals. That might be a typo though. So let's continue. Note, Cardinal Tisserant, an occult Freemason and dean of the 1958 conclave, told a priest teaching canon law that the election of John the 23rd was illegitimate because it was willed and planned for by forces alien to the Holy Spirit. From Vita 18, September 1977. Okay, so from Vita 18th of September 1977, I believe. Page 4. All right, that's in French. I actually did do a bit of French in school. Le Prophétie or whatever. Anyways, continuing. Prophecies on the Popes by St. Malachi. All right. The American government, and of course Moscow, did all they could to illegally affect the outcome of the 1958 conclave, which conclave did indeed elect Pius XII's handpicked successor, Cardinal Siri, on the fourth ballot of the first day, who chose the name Gregory XVII. Pope Gregory XVII, although abandoned by his own and a hostage under stealthy captivity, still carefully tried to get his message out. He gave a clear reference to what happened at the 1958 conclave, when he wrote in 1972 how the superpowers, Judeo-Masonry, could overturn a lawful conclave. This is a quote from Pope Gregory XVII here. The segregation of the conclave is yet more necessary. With modern means, with modern technology, without an absolute segregation, it would not be possible to save an election from the pressure of external powers. Today, the superpowers and the lesser ones alike have too great an interest in having on their side, through condescendence or weakness, the highest moral authority in the world. And they would do all that they are so very good at doing. The pressures to overturn the substance of the law of the conclave could be driven by the will to obtain precisely this result. Excerpt from the election of the Roman Pontiff, Lezione del Romano Pontifice by Joseph Cardinal Siri, Pope Gregory XVII, originally published in Renovatio 7, 1972, page 155-156 from Il Dovere dell'Ortodossia. All right. Additional notes. It has been said that the American Cardinal Spellman of New York was compromised as a result of skeletons in his closet. His name and his correspondences can be seen throughout many of the documents that were obtained by TCW. Further, when searching through these declassified documents at the National Archives, the fully anti-Catholic policy of the Masonic U.S. government is crystal clear. Most Americans don't know that the true Vatican and the United States have never had formal diplomatic relations. TCW has also obtained U.S. Department of State declassified secret documents which repeatedly report Pope Pius XII was virtually convinced the United States government intended to use an atomic weapon against the Vatican. It was reported he, Pius XII, literally had recurring nightmares of such a scenario, and cited that Pius XII believed a key reason the U.S. government did not have an ambassador physically at the Vatican, and no formal diplomatic relations, was that indeed the Masonic U.S. government was planning an atomic attack on the Vatican State itself. Okay, so between 1951 and 1958, the United States had no official representative whatsoever accredited to the Holy See. A member of the hierarchy, currently in exile, informed us that Montini, the future anti-Pope Paul VI, was in direct contact with communist Moscow at the time of the October 26, 1958 conclave, and the real threat that Gregory XVII received if he publicly proclaimed his pontificacy, that bishops would be immediately killed behind the Iron Curtain, was to be carried out via Montini. That is, Montini would immediately notify his comrades in the Soviet Union with their KGB to move forward with the slaughter of innocent Roman Catholic bishops. Dang, man. C. Declassified secret World War II document exposes Montini was communist infiltrator. I actually looked at this document and the quality of the image is so poor. It's so low quality that you can barely read it properly. So I don't know why they uploaded such a poor quality image. You literally can't read a lot of it properly. So hopefully at some point, if I'm able to, talk to them again and talk to them more frequently or stuff like that, I could request that they get a better quality image of that document, because it was really, a lot of it was very, very illegible. Continuing, this is from Benjamin, the Marano Jew, Disraeli to the British House of Commons, 1852. Says the world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes, right? As we talked about before with the Freemasons and the communists and all this kind of stuff, the globalists, Currently, the Jews, with their crimes or pollution or finances, rule the world. The Holy Church, with her true papacy, is in eclipse, exile. Make sure you don't get duped by a schismatic so-called Latin Mass, SSPX, or sedevacantist sect, and secure a properly blessed beeswax candle for the upcoming 3 days of darkness chastisement, which will serve as one large just inquisition execution of the enemies of order, i.e. the enemies of the Pope and his Catholic world. And this is I think it's the second last quote here, or the last one, yeah. For as surely as the Son of God reigns on high and will reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet, so surely everyone that lifts a heel or directs a weapon against his faith, his church, or his vicar upon earth will share the judgment which is laid up for the Antichrist whom he serves. Cardinal Manning, the present Christ of the Holy See, tested by prophecy, 4 lectures, page 92. All right. So, regarding the candles, I do not currently have a blessed wax candle. I would like to get one at some point if God wills, but I do not currently have one. All right. So the only way I would think to, get one would be TCW. And TCW had told me years ago that whoever responded to me, they were going to try to find me a candle. But of course, communication has been so sparse, so I haven't gotten a candle. Hopefully, if God wills, one day I'll get one, right? But right now I don't have one. So let's look at this declassified document here. All right. It says incoming telegram, Department of State. And it used to be secret. It says from Rome to Secretary of State, number 1166, October 11th, 2 p.m. And it says October 11th, 1958. Okay. Limited distribution. And this is written kind of like shorthand. So I'm going to try to read it in a way that would make more sense. Like it's not written in all proper sentences. It's kind of like notes. So it says, during conversation with embassy officer, Vatican source expressed personal view next pope will be quote unquote elected outside conclave by agreement between cardinals. Source said Pius XII elected this manner and recalled that as cardinals were entering 1939 conclave, Cardinal Pizarro had called him aside and asked him to prepare a biographical sketch of Pacelli, which is Pope Pius XII. Added he consulted with Monsignor Montini, and both decided for obvious reasons not to go ahead with Pizarro's request. Speculating on Pius XII's successor, source said college may very well choose an old cardinal whose short pontificate may be devoted entirely to the reorganization of the Roman Curia left by deceased pope in quote-unquote deplorable state. Source indicated election of Siri, Ruffini, Ottaviani would be quote-unquote misfortune for church, since these three cardinals have an unrealistic approach to great problems facing the world today. Source said election of any one of three could depend on influence of American cardinals and volunteered suggestion U.S. authorities would do well exercise discreetly, quote unquote, their own influence on certain American cardinals. Okay, so whoever this insider was telling this government operative that the U.S. government would do well to try to basically, manipulate American cardinals to obtain their desired quote unquote outcome for the 1958 conclave. Okay, so this is right here, government evidence that the 1958 conclave was being interfered with. All right, so let's now go back to the slides. Oh, and I forgot to mention, of course, where it says Monsignor Montini here, that is referring to the future anti-pope Paul VI, right? So on to the slides. Let's continue the slides now. All right. The 1988 meeting between Courtran and Pope Gregory XVII, right? Let's now go over TCW's account of this meeting. All right. So this page has a lot of extra information. Oh, let me turn the images on. Close that. Okay. All right, I'm gonna try to skip to that part. You see, where is it? Oh, here we go. All right. So, the historic mission of 1988. Let me try to zoom in to get the text a bit larger. All right, that should be much better for reading. All right, the historic mission of 1988 AD. This is a quote from Courtran. Now, I will mention regarding Courtran, the computer needs charging. Regarding Courtran, a few years ago, he actually became a heretic. And he made a book about, I think it was called the Catholic Manifesto, where he was teaching a bunch of communist stuff and stuff like that, and claiming that, you know, the Catholic Church has 1 billion members. So he seems to have like basically just apostatized, and we should not be scandalized by that, right? I mean, Judas was one of the Lord's apostles and betrayed him. And as I mentioned before, none of us, unless God divinely reveals it to us, are impervious to losing the Catholic faith, right? This Colt Tran guy, same thing. He used to be Catholic, used to help the true Pope. No, he's a heretic, right? I'm not aware of whether he has since then repented of his heresy or anything like that. I don't follow, you know, him. And I remember TCW was talking about basically like trying to like erase a lot of stuff about him from the websites and stuff, but this is still here right now. But yeah, so this Colt Tran guy, last I heard, he became a heretic, okay? Just so you know. All right, continuing. The historic mission of 1988 AD from Colt Tran, hand type statement, May 20th, 2006 AD. All right. It says, "Now I remember the words spoken by our Lord to Thomas. Blessed those who do not see it but believe it. Applied in our time. Blessed to you because you accept the historical fact that the white smoke from the Chapel Sistine at 5 p.m. on October 26, 1958, announced the Habemus Papam, who was Cardinal Giuseppe Siri, elected Pope Gregory XVII, but the power of darkness stopped him to run his papacy for 30 years. So I think his English is probably not perfect because he's from Vietnam, I believe. Stopped him to run his papacy for 30 years, 6 months and 6 days in the public. Except 10 months and 16 days, he actually ran the papacy from the secrecy. Why 10 months and 16 days? This was the days counting from day I met him on June 14th, 1988 to the day he passed away on May 2nd, 1989. Gradually, the people of the world realized that Pope Gregory XVII, Siri, and his successors are true popes of the Roman Catholic Church, and John 23rd, Roncalli, and his successors are anti-pope of the Roman Catholic Church. From the day I met Pope Gregory XVII, I loved him. Therefore, I wish even we are a handful of his follower. We love him, pray for him, and pray for the Roman Catholic Church." Okay? And this here says, Father Colt's pilgrimage to find Cardinal Siri, quote-unquote Cardinal Siri, Pope Gregory XVII, right, took 3 months of hard work, prayer, and penance, during which God revealed to him many insights and crowned his labor with success. And look, once again, just because God blesses somebody tremendously at a certain time doesn't mean they're even going to be saved, right? Or they're going to persevere. Look at Solomon, right? God literally appeared to Solomon and asked him, you know, what would you have me give you? And Solomon asked for wisdom. And then Solomon became an idolater with all his wives, right? So just because God, you know, blesses somebody tremendously at a certain point does not guarantee they will be saved, doesn't guarantee they'll persevere or anything like that. Because Solomon, it is unclear whether he went to heaven or hell. It is not clear from the Catholic sources I've seen talking about it. Like, so yeah, that's why I said, remember, God does not guarantee that you will persevere. Don't have that presumption where you assume that you can't lose the Catholic faith. You're like, I believe the truth. I will never stop believing the truth. Like, St. Peter told the Lord, I will never deny you, Lord. And then he denied the Lord, right? So don't have that overconfidence in yourself. Understand that the reason you have the Catholic faith, if you have it, is because God decided to give you it and grants you the ability or the grace to maintain it. And if you wanted to take that away, he could take that away at any time, right? So yeah. All right. Let's continue here. It says left to right. Father Colt traveling via train in Italy to hopefully find Cardinal Siri, April 30th, 1988. So that's this image here, traveling on a train. Ever with a cheerful countenance, Father Colt pictured on the streets of Italy during his quest. This is the middle image here. Note, while on his trip, Father asked many of the Italians that he met about Cardinal Siri. Numerous people said they had heard that Cardinal Siri had been elected Pope. And then Father Colt flying within Italian airspace during his strategic mission to find Cardinal Siri, May 13th, 1988, which is this last image here. All right. This here says, Metro train ticket receipt from Father Colt's mission to meet, quote-unquote, Cardinal Siri, April 1988. It says, note, to view a high-resolution picture, which includes many more documents and receipts, etc., some with Father Colt's name on them from his Holy Quest in 1988, please click here. I won't click that right now, because I didn't plan to, make that kind of document detour, but this is one of the train tickets right here, or a train ticket. Continuing, TCW learned that for one extended period of his journey, Father Colt rented an apartment in Genoa, Italy, close to an area where he knew that, quote unquote, Cardinal Siri was at times reported to be seen, although always with a group of individuals guarded. Okay? Like basically, being held hostage, being observed, that kind of stuff, but held hostage in the open, right? People wouldn't really know by looking at him that he's being held hostage, kind of like when somebody's kidnapped and basically they can't ask for help, that kind of stuff. And so they could basically go to the supermarket with their kidnapper, and you would have no idea that this person is like being held against their will, right? Let's see. Saint Anthony, the Wonder Worker, was invoked. Yeah. Cardinal. All right. And this says left to right, Basilica de Sant'Antonio, where Father Colt privately offered the Latin Mass, asking Saint Anthony for a miracle. Right here. The actual paper used by Father Colt on June 13th, 1988 AD, with the address of the Instituto Ravasco, right here. And then the third image is St. Anthony, okay? St. Anthony right there, right? On June 13th, 1988, the feast day of St. Anthony of Padua, Father Colt offered the Tridentine Mass in the Basilica of St. Anthony in Padua, Italy, with the Mass intention of asking St. Anthony for a miracle to help him find and speak with Cardinal Siri. After Mass the same morning, at breakfast, a priest from Genoa told Father Colt that, quote, Cardinal Siri left Genoa this morning. If you want to see him, go to the Instituto Ravasco, or Instituto Ravasco Convent at Via Pio 828 00165, Rome, in Rome. So let me see. I guess this is the address here. All right, 00165. I don't see 00165. You see 828. Yeah, but 8 is right there. Okay, cool. All right. Istituto Ravasco Convent, Rome, Italy. Father Colt promptly traveled from Venice to Genoa via railway on June 13th to this convent, the Istituto Ravasco, in Rome, to verify that Cardinal Siri would say Mass there the next morning. To further his chance or hope of seeing and speaking with the rumored 4 years hidden Pope, Father Colt took a taxi to the convent 1 hour before the Mass began. He proceeded to walk around the Istituto Ravasco convent grounds while reciting the Holy Rosary. Father Colt entered to the chapel just as Cardinal Siri began Mass. Afterward, he asked a supposed attendant of Cardinal Siri if he could have a moment alone with the Cardinal, but was promptly refused. Father Colt persisted, stating that he merely wanted to get an autograph from the Cardinal on a book that he had with him. The quote-unquote attendant, as another person in the room said, let him, Father Colt, have 5 minutes, very reluctantly permitted Father Colt to approach Cardinal Siri and added, but for a brief time only. Father Colt, now behind closed doors, briskly asked Cardinal Siri in French if he was the Pope, and he, not knowing who Father Colt was, denied it. Father Colt then, as he related to the editor of TCW in January of 2006, said, at that point, it was not from me. I was not even thinking these words at all. I say to him, if you had done the consecration of Russia, as Our Lady requested, then my bishop would not have been killed, and my country would not have fallen to the communists. He looked at me with tear in his eye and say, you know. Father Colt added, I don't know where this came from. It was not my words, it was Holy Ghost. Says there is more to this exchange, some of which is noted below, which Father Colt related on videotape during a sermon on May 20th, 2006 in Corpus Christi, Texas. Okay, let me see. All right. I'd like to hear that tape, honestly. That'd be great. I don't think they have the audio here. All right. Through the intercession of St. Anthony of Padua, within scarcely 24 hours, Father Colt was able to locate and have an audience with the hostage Pope Gregory XVII on June 14th, 1988. The following picture, taken moments after Father Colt privately met with and honored His Holiness Pope Gregory XVII, records this historical event. See timestamp in lower right corner 88, 6, 14. So I think that's what? 1988, June 14th, right? So here's the image here of Father Colt with Pope Gregory the 17th, who even in that image looks very, very troubled, you know? Left to right picture of Father Colt Tran, His Holiness Pope Gregory the 17th, and one of the hostage Pope's wicked captors, Monsignor Groan. June 14th, 1988 AD, Istituto Ravasco Convent, Roma, Italia, Rome, Italy. 30 years of pain. Then Father Colt said, "Come with me right now. I have 2 tickets to go to America where there are people who will help you." Pope Gregory the 17th replied, "That will be impossible. I cannot go. They can kill me at any time." As I mentioned, the Pope being in danger of death, and I believe personally that the current Pope Gregory the 18th will probably be brutally killed before the age of peace. It says, excerpt from the first conversation between Father Colt and the hostage Pope Gregory the 17th. In a tense, brief private meeting at the Istituto Ravasco Convent in Rome on June 14th, 1988 AD. Pope Gregory the 17th instructed Father Colt to come back later that night at a specified time where they could possibly speak undetected. Okay? So, yeah. Father Colt had several audiences with Pope Gregory the 17th after this initial one. As he emerged from the meeting with Pope Gregory the 17th, where His Holiness confided to Father Colt that his captors could kill him at any time, Father Colt handed his camera to a person who was standing in the room and asked him to take some quick pictures. Again, this was right in the heart of enemy territory, i.e., notice the picture of Antipope John Paul II in the upper right corner. Let's look at that again. Yeah, Antipope John Paul II right there. Okay. Where are we at? This Monsignor Groan, who posed to the world as one of the Cardinal's household, in fact his official secretary, was just the opposite. Father Colt related later that he, Monsignor Groan, was an enemy of the faith, de fide, whose duty it was to control Pope Gregory the 17th. Groan adamantly tried to stop the picture from being taken. Note the look on his, Groan's face, and the gestures he is making with his hands. Okay, so I guess you're saying he was like trying to stop the picture from being taken and stuff. That's why he's like posed like that. Continuing. It is fitting that our Pope presented himself with dignity. He holds his hands to his cassock and stands firm. Also look at his eyes closely. In Father Colt's own words, "From the day I met Pope Gregory the 17th on June 14th, 1988, I saw in his eye, and I never forget, the eye of suffering, the eye of sorrow, the eye of humility, the eye of love. His eye always follow me, daytime, nighttime, whenever I wake up. I know he suffered too much. He suffered so much." And as I mentioned before, tons of prophecies, tons of prophecies about a suffering Pope, a hidden Pope, Pope being taken prisoner, the Pope not having a public voice. This is all consistent with the prophecies, not sedevacantism. Continuing. Pope Gregory the 17th instructed Father Colt to return later to the convent, saying, "Come back here at 8 o'clock tonight. My secretary will be gone then." Okay. Come back here at 8 o'clock tonight. My secretary will be gone then. There should be a comma. Come back here at 8 o'clock tonight, comma, my secretary will be gone then, right? So, this is, of course, I believe Father Colt again. Well, I mean, he was Father Colt then, but now he would be just a heretic, although he would still remain a priest, just not a Catholic priest, you understand? So this is Colt here, Pope Gregory the 17th, and I'm not sure, I think is this Pintonello? I'm not sure, I have to see. Yeah, Pintonello, all right. Left to right. Providential priest, Father Colt Tran, April 4th, 1989 in the US, on this image here. Then the hostage Pope Gregory the 17th, shortly before His Holiness's unexpected death, right here. And then the third image, His Excellency Archbishop Arrigo Pintonello, who was called in by Father Colt Van Tran's group in 1988 to help Pope Gregory the 17th operate the underground Vatican, and most generously responded, Father Colt and a select group of clerics were working closely with the hidden Pope Gregory XVII, who was constantly monitored. So he most generously responded. Basically, they asked him for help and he responded. Okay, I thought they were quoting what he said here. I don't think this is a quote. Okay, Father Colt and a select group of clerics were working closely with the hidden Pope Gregory XVII, who was constantly monitored and under duress during his forced exile in Genoa, Italy. His Holiness expired on May 2nd, 1989, yet formulated and implemented a strategy to save the true Petrine hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church. Continuing, says Father Colt obeyed. So this is continuing from before when the Pope told him to come back at 8 o'clock, right? Continuing, this was a little like image detour of sorts. Father Colt obeyed and brought a trusted contact, Monsignor Carlo Taramasso, with him from nearby Santa Marinella, and eventually 2 more trusted witnesses were summoned, which included the well-known Italian prelate, His Excellency Archbishop Arrigo Pintonello. Pope Gregory XVII, an expert in doctrine, then acted by formulating a detailed continuance of papacy plan from 1988 to 1989, which included creating cardinals and designating a camerlengo who could convene a lawful conclave. And the note here says, I think from camerlengo, on the death of the pontiff, the Cardinal Camerlengo, as representative of the Sacred College, assumes the charge of the papal household, notifying to all the cardinals of the church the death of the late pope and the impending election. Every cardinal has the right to vote in the conclave, but he must be present in person to do so. From F.A. Forbes, The Life of Pius X, page 62, 1918, imprimatur. Father Peter Colt Van Tran, the important priest that rescued His Holiness Pope Gregory XVII in June of 1988, on May 20th, 2006 AD, in Corpus Christi, Texas, on the commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the birth of Pope Gregory XVII, publicly confirmed on videotape before a group of true Catholics that Pope Gregory XVII did appoint cardinals before His Holiness's mysterious death on May 2nd, 1989 AD. Father Colt clarified that there are today, true cardinals that were appointed by Pope Gregory XVII still living the underground church. Okay? And as I mentioned, there's a prophecy stating that the Pope and his cardinals will flee Rome under tragic circumstances to a place where they are unknown. And you'll see that prophecy later, God willing, in the prophecy section. So according to prophecy, there will still be cardinals, and they'll just be unknown to the world, as these cardinals are. There are true Catholic cardinals today. They are just unknown to most people, which is why sedevacantists falsely assume that there's no pope because they don't see one. Okay? Continuing, let me see. So this mentions, let me see, on videotape. I'd love to see these tapes. The audio they mentioned earlier, this videotape, like, I'd like them to like share these videos and stuff, like, or something. I mean, it's not like Colt Tran's identity is hidden. Like, we see his picture here, so it's not like he has to be, it's not like Greg the 18th, where we don't know what he looks like. Like, we can see Colt Tran in all these images. So what would be the problem with sharing a video of him saying certain things if you've already got his pictures here? So he's not hiding the same way, All right. Continuing, the gates of hell shall not prevail. Now this, their podcast, or like, I think this is down. Yeah, you see, it says the radio and podcast interviews page is currently under revision. That has been that way since like 2021 and probably earlier. Like from the first time I found out Pope Gregory the 18th, which was in 2021, this page was down even back then. So yeah. All right, so I think, let me see. I'm trying to see if there's anything else. I think that's the main stuff. yeah, I think those are the main details I wanted to share just about the actual meeting and the fact that basically Coltrane, and other prelates started having these meetings with the Pope and stuff to create this continuation of the papacy plan, to appoint cardinals on the Camerlengo and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, this is all the details about the underground church and the Pope who was actually elected in 1958, but was, unknown to the world, as prophecy said he would be, right? So yeah, let's continue the slides. All right, so I have some notes here as well. Monsignor Carlo Taramasso, one of the prelates we mentioned in that, reading just now, died on March 16th, 1989 AD. This is a quote from TCW's website. It says, Monsignor Carlo Taramasso of Santa Marinella was brought in by Father Peter Van Tran to the clandestine meetings with Pope Gregory XVII in June of 1988. Taramasso was well connected. He was responsible for the keys, security of the Sistine Chapel at that time, and was essential in bringing the well-known Archbishop Arrigo Pintonello, whom Father Peter Van Tran had never met, to those historic June 88 meetings. Both Monsignor Carlo Taramasso and Archbishop Arrigo Pintonello were created cardinals by Pope Gregory XVII in June 1988 at the Istituto Ravasco Convent at Via Pio 828 in Rome. Cardinal Taramasso was also consecrated a bishop there by the hostage pope. The Italian or English-speaking Cardinal Taramasso would become the chief confidant and advisor for Pope Gregory XVII until March 16, 1989, when Cardinal Taramasso suddenly and mysteriously died 10 weeks after a visit from the infamous quote-unquote Cardinal Casaroli of the quote-unquote Vatican. An older parishioner, this is a different quote, you see a different website. Yeah, a different quote here. A different article, you see the link here. So if you want to go read this, I guess you could. I'll see if I, remember to put the links in the description too. So you could just go click it. Anyways, an older parishioner of his related the following story when asked by TCW the following question. What kind of priest was Carlo Taramasso? Okay, so an older parishioner of Carlo Taramasso. He was the best one, was his ready answer. This is his story. He lost his first child, a son, as a baby. The second, also a boy, needed a complicated surgery in order to survive. He could not afford to pay for the operation, and he felt helpless. His priest, Father Taramasso, had worked in a hospital in Rome with a doctor whose specialization was pediatrics and this type of surgery. Father Taramasso arranged the whole thing at no cost to the parents. The child was saved and became a grown man with a family of his own. This is the type of priest that Carlo Taramasso was. He did his best for everybody. He was known for his intelligence and was a tireless worker for his spiritual children. Archbishop Arrigo Pintonello died July 8, 2001 AD. Monsignor Pintonello, who refused to sign any of the Vatican II documents, was an archbishop from the ranks of the military chaplains. He was designated military ordinary, chief of military chaplains in 1953. During his active clerical life, he was commissioned in 1941 chaplain chief inspector of 360 chaplains of the CSIR and of the ARMIR, the Italian army on the Russian front. To him is due the organization and construction of 380 cemeteries for the war dead, from Botosani in Bessarabia to the Bend of the Don. Decorated with 2 military crosses, he also earned a solemn commendation for the work of Christian piety in which he was involved in those dramatic and painful times. He was a rector of 2 pontifical regional seminaries, Viterbo and Salerno, for the training of young future priests. In a clandestine meeting in Rome in June 1988, Monsignor Pintonello was created a cardinal by the hostage Pope Gregory XVII. All right, let's see. Continue a quote here. Mel Gibson, who owns the movie rights to the Cardinal series story, in the mid-1990s compiled a North American and Italian research team to hopefully visit or interview the renowned Italian prelate, Archbishop Arrigo Pintonello. Gibson's team was able to have 3 meetings with Archbishop Pintonello from 1995 to 1997. 2 of the meetings were videotaped at length by Gibson's crew. Note, a member of the PRC staff has viewed all the footage or recorded the dialogue. I think PRC is like the Papal Restoration. I think it's kind of a different name that TCW sometimes uses, Papal Restoration staff. Fascinating questions were asked to Archbishop Pintonello, which received often equally or even greater fascinating replies. In a 1996 video interview conducted at Selva de Pini, an international school for ambassadors' children in Pomezia, a suburb of Rome, with His Excellency's Secretary Monsignor Giacomino Femino present and Mel Gibson seated to the prelate's right, an American interviewer, utilizing a professional Italian translator, obtained historically important information, which included Archbishop Pintonello stating that worldwide Masonry had taken over the church and was being controlled from the Vatican structures itself. And this exchange, American interviewer, I believe Siri was a pope. Archbishop Pintonello, Siri was the best pope. Note, Archbishop Pintonello was created a cardinal by Pope Gregory XVII, known to the world as Cardinal Archbishop Giuseppe Siri of Genoa, Italy, in a clandestine meeting in June 1988 at the Istituto Ravasco convent in Rome, along with at least 2 other clerics. Mel Gibson owns the rights to any publishing of the Pintonello videotaped interviews. TCW. All right. Pope Gregory XVIII. Now we're going to get into the successor, right? His successor. Pope Gregory XVII died on May 2nd, 1989. It is believed from poisoning. The exiled hierarchy quickly began preparing for his exiled successor. His Camerlengo announced the convening of a new conclave on June 3rd, 1990. This is a little image of an announcement. It says, official announcement. Cardinals elevated by Pope Giuseppe Siri in exile are requested to contact Cardinal Camerlengo regarding next conclave. Write to Cardinal Camerlengo, P.O. Box 262522, Houston, Texas 77207, USA. Okay, and it said the Houston Post, Sunday, June 3rd, 1990. And this is another kind of image here. It says the Houston Post, June 3rd, 1990, I believe. It says this is the ad that Father Cote-Tran spoke about on page 14 in his Pentecost Sunday sermon. It also appeared on June 17th, Corpus Christi Sunday, in the second Il Mattino di Padova paper in Padua, Italy. This is what I mean about some of the images being so low quality. This one is still pretty legible, but the other one about Montini, the Antipope Paul VI, was way more illegible than this. So even this, though, I had to really scale it up a lot. Anyways, in the Il Mattino di Padova paper in Padua, Italy, it also appeared on June 17th, Corpus Christi Sunday, in the Il Mattino di Padova paper in Padua, Italy. I have reason to believe that the Cardinal Camerlengo of Pope Siri desires that this ad appear in as many papers as possible in North America, and I assume he's going to say and Europe, but he got cut off. All right. On that same day, Father Cote-Tran gave a sermon at St. Jude's Shrine in Stafford, Texas. And it says, he will bring to your mind whatever I have said to you. John 14:27. Beloved brethren, 2,000 years ago, in a small corner of Jerusalem, one event changed the world. This event has been called Pentecost. The Holy Ghost came upon the apostles who began to establish the kingdom of God on the earth, understood as the Catholic Church. Today, in one corner of the United States, an event has taken place to declare how the Holy Ghost protects the Catholic Church in the time of crisis. The new event also starts on the Feast of Pentecost. I would like to talk about the advertisement printed in the newspaper today. It reads, Cardinals elevated by Pope Giuseppe Siri in exile are requested to contact Cardinal Camerlengo regarding the next conclave. Recall that upon the death of a pope, the interim administration of the Holy See is carried on by the Cardinal Camerlengo, especially to set up a conclave to elect a new pope. This advertisement refers to Pope Giuseppe Siri's Cardinal Camerlengo, not the Vatican Cardinal Camerlengo. Back in 1987, the traditional Catholics in the United States began to hear more about Cardinal Giuseppe Siri, Archbishop of Genoa, who, according to many sources of rumors, was elected Pope in two conclaves, 63 and 78, but could not take charge of the papacy because of Christ's enemies. This rumor stirred me up and pushed me to see him. Truly, I did see him. 2,000 years ago, St. Peter said, "Ye men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God among you by miracles and wonders and signs, which God did by him in the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, you, by the hand of wicked men, have crucified and slain, whom God hath raised up, having loosed the sorrows of hell, as it was impossible that he should behold by it. This Jesus hath God raised again, whereof we are witnesses." Acts 2:22-32. The person I testify today is Vicar of Christ, Pope Gregory XVII, Giuseppe Siri, born at Genoa 20 May 1906, ordained 1928, Bishop 1944, Archbishop 1946, Cardinal 1953, Pope 1958, died May 2nd, 1989. He resigned his papacy in exile, in silence, and in agony. Read that again. He resigned his papacy in exile, in silence, and in agony. His message was transferred through his book called Gethsemane. His activity was to appoint the cardinals who hold on the apostolicity and the protection of the papacy. The official announcement is the proof. It says that Pope Gregory XVII, Giuseppe Siri, was real. He was Pope of the Catholic Church. He was elected legally. He also accepted the papacy on the day 26 October 1958. But the enemies of Christ had stopped him from running the papacy. As a matter of fact, on the evening 26 October 1958, the white smoke from the conclave had brought good news for mankind. But afterward, it became black as the symbol of the time of darkness during which we live, which is what I was talking about earlier, right? It definitely seems to be, a kind of visual sign that a pope was elected, but then the age of darkness began, right? Which is what we're in right now. 2,000 years ago, after hearing the sermon of St. Peter on the day of Pentecost, the people said to Peter, "What shall we do?" Then Peter said to them, "Save yourselves from this perverse generation." And of course, calling a generation perverse applies to our generation more so than probably ever before, because everything is just filth, right? Just prostitutes everywhere, sodomy everywhere, filth everywhere. This is definitely a perverse generation, not just in terms of sin in general, but specifically perversion. You understand? That's Acts 2:37-40. St. Peter also taught them how to save themselves from the perverse generation by receiving the words and being baptized. The words you heard today, beloved brethren, are the words saving you from many heresies and protecting you from all schismatics. Pope Boniface VIII, 1294-1303, said in the bull Antiquorum Habet, February 22nd, 1300, that we declare, say, define, and proclaim to every human creature that they, by necessity for salvation, are entirely subject to the Roman Pontiff. Okay? That's from Denzinger 469a. Pope Clement VI, 1342-1352, demanded the Catholics of the Armenians, September 20th, 1351, as following. In the second place, we ask whether you and the Armenians obedient to you believe that no man of the wayfarers outside the faith of this church and outside the obedience of the Pope of Rome can finally be saved. You see, once again, no one outside the church can be saved, period. There's no heretic being saved, no pagan, none of that garbage. Continuing. Therefore, to subject yourself to the Pope, that was from Denzinger 570b. Therefore, to subject yourself to the Pope is necessary for salvation. To refuse to communicate with members of the church subject to him is schismatic. To deny the dogmas defined by him is heretical. Now, you know to whom you have to be subject, to respect, and to obey. Now, you understand why the unrest in the church. It will take 40 years to undo the harm John did to the church in a few years. That's a quote from Pope Gregory XVII, I believe. He summarized the Council Vatican II of Antipope Paul VI as having issued fallible documents. They never bind us. He repudiated the acts of Antipope John Paul II as an idolatry of apostolic works. From Gary Macon, or however you say that name, The Inner Elite, page 234. Now you realize what St. Peter said. Save yourselves from this perverse generation. One moment. Okay. All right. Hold on. All right. Now you realize what St. Peter said. Save yourselves from this perverse generation. If we accept the duration of one generation lasting 40 years, then this perverse generation beginning in 1958 will end about year of 2000. We hope that by about year of 2000, all antipopes will be demasked and mankind will start a new cycle of the salvation. This is the period of peace foretold by Our Lady at Fatima. And of course, the year is currently 2025 and the age of peace, of course, has not begun. We're going to get into this later about, prophecies about when the 3 days of darkness will happen or when the age of peace will begin and stuff like that. According to the prophecy that I've seen, basically the main candidate for, I think, the 3 days of darkness will be the year 2038. Okay, but we're going to get into that in more detail in the prophecy section. All right, let's see. Continuing. The message of Fatima, which emphasizes the penance and the prayers for the conversion of sinners, is close to the term used by St. Peter, being baptized. The message of Fatima, which emphasizes the penance and prayers. Okay, yes. We are baptized by water and Holy Ghost. Now we must be baptized by tears by the same way as Jesus was in Gethsemane, with the same spirit as Pope Gregory XVII underwent during 31 years of his pontificate. Tears are symbols of repentance. Repentance is the central point of ruin and restoration. Yes, we live in the time of ruin of the Catholic Church, and we want to restore it. Remember, Pope Gregory XVII said, the only way to serve the truth is to bring to birth or rebirth in the men true hope brought by the person and the word of Christ. Gethsemane, page 377. Now, the words of Pope Gregory XVII mean to us that the only way to serve the truth is the rebirth of the true Pope who truly is Vicar of Christ and carries out the words of Christ. The dream of the Pope in exile, Gregory XVII, will come true by the next conclave. Cardinal Camerlengo really has sent to us a great and exciting news today, the calling for a new conclave. This exciting news will stir the Catholic Church, wake up the people, and destroy the conspiracy of Satan. The darkness of the Church will end with the victory of the rebirth of a new Pope. 2,000 years ago, in the day of Pentecost, the Holy Ghost had brought the Church from darkness to light in front of mankind. Today, the Holy Ghost also guides the cardinals elevated by Pope Gregory XVII from fear to courage in order to present to mankind the true hope in the darkness of confusion. 2,000 years ago, the excitement came from the violent wind blowing. Then everything changed. Apostles changed. Multitudes changed. The world changed. Today, the excitement comes from the official announcement that is spreading. Then everything will be changed. A new conclave, a new pope, a new hierarchy, a new people. 2,000 years ago, the Holy Ghost prompted the apostles to speak. They proclaimed the name of Jesus and his redemption by the gift of tongues, so that their hearers asked each other, "What meaneth this?" Today, many readers will ask themselves, what's happening in Rome now? From this question, mankind will be enlightened after a long period of darkness. 2,000 years ago, the same message had been transferred by different languages so that every man heard them speak in his own tongue and understood the wonderful works of God. Today, the same announcement was translated in many languages so that everybody will see the hidden mystery of sin, which is revealed according to the mercy of God. 2,000 years ago, the apostles surrounded the Mother of God to receive the Holy Ghost. Today, we ask our Mother of God, help the cardinals to have the enlightenment and the courage to carry out their mission. Therefore, our prayer in this time will be, O God, who settest straight what has gone astray, and gathers together what is scattered, we beseech thee in thy mercy to pour down on the cardinals the Holy Ghost, so that they might choose the Holy Father, who stands up to protect the Catholic faith, and put aside all schism and heresy, and expand thy kingdom on the earth. 2,000 years ago, Pentecost was the beginning of the New Testament. Today is a new beginning of man's history, and you are witnesses to this event. May the Holy Ghost guide us in the new pilgrimage. Amen. Okay? And this is an excerpt from todayscatholicworld.com, basically outlining the details of that conclave and what Pope Gregory XVIII conducted afterwards. So this says, in today's Catholic world, although entrusted for some time with this information, directly received in writing from the hierarchy, is now through their guidance publishing the chronological details of this imperative history. 1. May 2nd, 1991 in Rome, 2 years to the date of Gregory XVII's death, his cardinals celebrated a requiem mass for him and proceeded to hold a conclave. May 3rd, 1991, May 3rd, 1991, a new pontiff was elected and chose the name Gregorius XVIII, the 262nd successor of St. Peter. 3. May 13th, 1991, Gregorius XVIII consecrated Russia by name to the Immaculate Heart in union with all the bishops of the world. 4. May 14th, 1991, Gregorius XVIII held conference with his cardinals and left Rome in exile per God's will. TCW summary. His Holiness Gregorius XVIII, Gregory XVIII, was elected Pope in Rome in a secret conclave. The Holy Father's first act as pontiff was to consecrate Russia by name to the Immaculate Heart, in union with all the bishops of the world, i.e. Catholic bishops, those with canonical mission, jurisdiction from him, in as public a ceremony as prudence permitted. Following this momentous event, he gave counsel to his cardinals and left Rome in exile in obedience to the divine will. And as I mentioned before, there's literally a prophecy that says, near the end of the world, hostile mobs will rob the church of all its possessions and persecute the church and stuff. I'm kind of paraphrasing. And it said that the Pope and his cardinals will have to flee Rome under tragic circumstances to a place where they will be unknown. And I mean, this is quite obviously, it's pretty much certain this is the fulfillment of that prophecy. The Pope and his cardinals left Rome after having this conclave, right, to a place where they are now unknown. Exactly word for word, what the prophecy said would happen is exactly what happened here. Word for word, okay? Now, actually, I think yesterday or the day before, I think it was yesterday, I was just lying down and I just suddenly had a realization. I was like, wait a minute, I never noticed that. The very same year in which Pope Gregory XVIII consecrated Russia to the Immaculate Heart, the Soviet Union fell in 1991. That same year. So the Pope consecrated Russia to the Immaculate Heart in May 1991, and the Soviet Union fell, I think, in October 1991. Let me just double check. Let me see. I'm pretty sure it's October. Let me see real quick. Hold on. When did the Soviet Union fall? It says December 26, 1991. Okay. So you see May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. 7 months later. 7 months later, the Soviet Union, which was a communist, government, collapsed. Okay. So to me, that is a strong sign that the actions of Pope Gregory XVIII had a tremendous supernatural impact on Russia being freed from communism, right? And based on my knowledge of Russia today, right, this is interesting to me for several reasons. Based on my knowledge of Russia, today, Russia is basically the most moral heretic country. Of course, they're still godless because they're heretics. And of course, there's going to be, they believe in divorce. They believe in, of course, just general heretical stuff. But they are, on average, or in general, from what I understand of Russia, they have a higher moral level than basically the rest of the entire rest of the world. Okay. For example, Russia is very anti-sodomy. Like, for example, when I was in secondary school, which Americans would call like high school, just so you all know, I wasn't born in America. I was actually born in Barbados and moved to America about 10 years ago. But Barbados is an English speaking country. So that's why I don't sound like someone who doesn't know English or something. But when I was in high school or, secondary school in Barbados or whatever, around like, let's say 2014, 2015, I had known that Putin and Russia were very, very anti-sodomy. They would stop sodomite parades and be beating up sodomites and stuff like that. So I was like very, very interested in that. And I remember, because I've always, from my, upbringing, my earthly father instilled in me from very, very young, even though he was a heretic, he really, really was very, very anti-sodomy and taught me to hate sodomy from a very young age. So I was very, very pleased to see a country that hated sodomy, And I remember I admired Putin so much that I actually had his picture as my profile picture on Facebook. Like, that's how much I love the fact that he didn't support sodomy and stuff like that, right? And then years later, before I became a Catholic, for a period of time, I was basically an Eastern so-called Orthodox heretic or catechumen, because I would go to this monastery and the monks there basically considered me to be like a catechumen, And during that time, I was heavily considering moving to Russia because I knew that Russia was very anti-sodomy. They had, a higher moral level than basically the rest of the world and stuff like that. They weren't just all just sodomite prostitutes like how you have in America, right? So I was very, very interested in moving to Russia. And so continuing the slide here, for example, Russia is very anti-sodomy, and most Russians consider themselves to be, quote unquote Christians. Of course, they're usually Eastern so-called Orthodox so-called Christians, not real Christians as, Catholics, but they tend to have a higher moral standard than the rest of the world. And as far as I recall, my memory of this is very hazy because this was several years ago and I don't remember the exact details, but I think in Russia, their government has programs or something to help families, to basically encourage families to have more children and to help the wife stay at home and stuff like that. I think that is a thing in Russia. I can't say 100%. I could be misremembering some of the details there, but I feel like I remember something about Russia. Basically, the government kind of basically encouraging people to have more children and to have more family and, have more family values and stuff like that, So, so I mentioned here when I was an Eastern heretic, I was considering moving to Russia, right, for these reasons, right? So all this being said, right, the Soviet Union fell in 1991 after Gregory the 18th consecrated Russia to the Immaculate Heart. And today, in my opinion, Russia is because there are no Catholic countries anymore, so there can't possibly be a truly good country right now because there are no Catholic countries left. But Russia is basically, in my opinion, the most moral country in the world right now. Of all the bad morals, it is the least bad. You know what I mean? Is the lesser of the evils, or the least of the evils that I'm aware of. And so it seems to me that God is preparing Russia for conversion to the Catholic faith, because we see this kind of transformation, of course, on a micro level as well, right? For example, if a certain heretic starts to, try to obey their conscience more, try to be a good person more, actually try to keep God's commandments and stuff like that, actually try to find the truth and understand the Bible properly, those kinds of things, you see that person improving their morals, right? Seeking a higher moral standard, seeking to please God more, even though, of course, they're operating within the realm of their darkness, of the darkness of their ignorance. You understand? So they can't be truly good because they're not Catholic in the state of grace, but they're trying to be good. They're aiming to improve their lives and to please God and stuff like that. And according to, like, you know, Father Michael Muller, Reverend Bishop George Hay, that kind of stuff, that person, if they persevere in seeking goodness and trying to find the truth and trying to please God, God will then grant that person the grace of conversion so that he can save them. You understand? And that's basically on a micro level, like an individual, but I feel like that's what's happening to Russia as a country. It seems as though Russia as a country, of course, was communist, completely godless, right? And now they're basically heretical, and of course, therefore godless just by the very fact that they're heretical. But they're less godless than they were as you know, under communism and stuff like that. And they basically have a higher moral level. So I'm hoping that what happens with an individual where they, like, you know, slowly try to become better over time, Russia is basically on that same trajectory where they're trying to be a godly country. They're trying to have godly laws, and they're trying to support family values, trying to, like, not support sodomy, that kind of stuff. And so I'm hoping that basically the same way that, like, say, like, you know, Russell Brand, you know, was a pagan, then he became a heretic, right? And hopefully, God willing, will then become a Catholic and actually die as a saint, I pray. It seems like Russia is undergoing a similar transformation, right? And this is actually consistent with prophecy, because there's a prophecy, as I write here on the slides here, there's a prophecy by Blessed Anna Maria Taiji, or Taiji, I don't know how you say it, but Blessed Anna Maria Taiji, that says Russia will become a Catholic country after the 3 days of darkness. So it would make sense that we can actually see Russia progressing towards Catholicism, although, of course, they're still heretics right now. This is the quote. It says, this is the prophecy, right? After the 3 days of darkness, Saints Peter and Paul, having come down from heaven, will preach throughout the world and designate a new pope. A great light will flash from their bodies and will settle upon the cardinal, the future pontiff. And notice right there, it says settle upon the cardinal, right? Because we still have cardinals right now. They're just hidden from the world. Continuing. Then Christianity will spread throughout. Oh, and another thing, sorry. You see here how it says Saints Peter and Paul will designate a new pope? This, for me, is more confirmation that my understanding of the prophecy about the Pope dying a cruel death may be accurate. Because if Pope Gregory XVIII dies a cruel death before the 3 days of darkness, then at that point, there really won't be a Pope. And that's why Saints Peter and Paul will have to select a new Pope, because the previous Pope would have died a cruel death. You understand? So that is all consistent there. Continuing. Then Christianity will spread throughout the world. Whole nations will join the church shortly before the reign of Antichrist. These conversions will be amazing. Those who shall survive shall have to conduct themselves well. There shall be innumerable conversions of heretics who will return to the bosom of the church. All will note the edifying conduct of their lives, as well as that of all other Catholics. Russia, England, and China will come into the church. Okay? Yeah, that's the end of the quote there. So Russia, according to this prophecy, will become a Catholic country after the 3 days of darkness. And I personally can see that moral progression of Russia. Okay? So I do pray for this to be, you know, to come true and stuff like that. And of course, I pray for those who are currently in Russia before the age of peace, you know, to, like, you know, be converted and be saved, become Catholic. Of course, the entire country will not, according to the prophecy here. But of course, some individuals, you know, may discover the truth and become true Catholics and hopefully die as saints and stuff like that. But yeah, so it's very interesting how you can literally see the steps that Russia is taking as a country towards Catholicism, because, you know, basically it seems as though God is preparing, basically, like, as a country becomes more and more moral, the people are more and more disposed towards accepting the truth, you know? Like, if a country is completely godless and filthy and horrible, it's less likely you're going to have people convert when they hear the truth. But if you have a country of people who are genuinely seeking to be godly, genuinely seeking to keep God's commandments, genuinely seeking to honor what they believe are the teachings of God's church and stuff like that, those people are going to be more likely to accept the truth when it is told to them and when God reveals it to them, right? They're more likely to have ears to hear and eyes to see, which is why I say stuff like, for example, this whole presentation is primarily geared towards people who consider themselves to be traditional Catholics, not Novosordites or heretic Protestants and stuff like that, because people who consider themselves to be traditional Catholics are more likely, therefore, in my view, to receive the truth when they hear it, because they already have that understanding that Rome is apostate, those guys are anti-popes, there's a major problem going on, that the church is being persecuted, the truth is being fought against, the truth is hidden and stuff like that. They already have that understanding, and they're already basically, being directed by God towards the truth. They just haven't arrived at the truth yet, And so when someone who's searching for the truth hears the truth, they're more likely to receive it well than somebody who's not even searching for the truth and who just doesn't care, who's just living a completely godless life, or who thinks that heresy is totally fine and all that kind of stuff, But people who consider themselves to be, Sedevacantists, the Conclavists, all this kind of stuff, that to me demonstrates that they have at least a desire for the truth, as perhaps some goal of understanding the church's crisis, or some goal of, being a real Catholic and stuff like that. So they're more likely to receive the truth when, it is made known to them. So continuing, the visibility of the Pope. There are many Sedevacantists or others who make the argument that since the church is a visible society and the papacy is a visible or public office, then a pope cannot be hidden or unknown to the world. This can be answered in many ways. First, if the visibility of the church meant that the church could not possibly be in a state where she is invisible to those outside the church, then it would not be the unanimous testimony of the fathers of the early church that near the end of the world, the church would be invisible, hidden from the world, in the catacombs and dens, etc. Okay? Certainly, the fathers of the church understood the divine constitution of the church, her characteristics as a visible society, etc., but this did not prevent them from saying what they did, i.e., near the end of the world, her visibility will be significantly reduced. You understand? So these fathers who talked about the church being hidden near the end of the world and stuff like that, what they're saying would contradict what you're saying. You're saying, it's not possible for the church to be invisible and stuff. So are you saying that these fathers taught heresy then? No, they did not. They simply understood that normally the church is, visible and public, stuff like that. But under certain circumstances, as is the case today, the church can be hidden for a period of time, as per God's will. Continuing. Persons who make this argument are often assuming that they and the other schismatics who reject the Pope are the Catholic Church, right? But they are not. So another thing to say is that the Pope is hidden from those outside the church, but those who are in the church know about the Pope, right? Real Catholics today know about the Pope. You on the outside, you don't know about the Pope, right? Now, it is perfectly consistent with Catholicism that the Pope or the church could be unknown to non-Catholics, just as St. Peter was unknown to many pagans before the apostles reached them, right? So it is not a requirement that those outside the church, such as schismatics, need to be aware of the Pope, right? Because remember, as I mentioned before, no schismatic thinks that he's a schismatic. Okay, so a Sedevacantist who's a schismatic, let's say in God's eyes, he's really a true schismatic. Like he's not even just an erring Catholic. He has like a stubborn will. And for some reason, God doesn't even consider him to be like erring or anything. He's just a straight up schismatic. He's not going to think that he's a schismatic, right? No schismatic thinks that he is a schismatic. Continuing. Secondly, regarding the visibility of the Pope, regarding the axiom Papa dubius nullus Papa, or a doubtful Pope, no Pope, let's see what Cardinal Johann Baptist Franzelin, S.J., who is considered by many as the greatest theologian of the 19th century, said about the proper understanding of this statement. And of course, my personal favorite theologian in the 19th century would be Father Michael Muller. But, this is not a competition, all right? Let's go here. Somebody's like, no, I like Father Michael Muller more. They're like, dude, you could like whichever, theologian you want as long as you didn't teach heresy. All right. So, whole church has never doubted election of Gregory the 17th. Papal prophecy of Venerable Bernard de Bustis, 15th century. And this is actually the prophecy that I believe. Let me see. No, that's a different one. Okay. It says, near the time of the Antichrist will come a most violent conflict with the Roman Church, such that there will be great tribulations. At this time, a schism will be produced in the bosom of the church on the occasion of the election of the Pope. There is one who will be called the true Pope, but he will not be truly so. He will persecute the true Pope and all those who obey him, so that the majority would declare themselves for the anti-Pope rather than for the true Pope. But this anti-Pope will have a sad end, and the true one will remain the unique and uncontested pontiff. This is now prophecy of Bishop Whitman. Violent hands will be laid on the supreme head of the Catholic Church. Yes, the flock will become small. All right. Cardinal Johann Baptist Franzlin, S.J., who died in 1886, pictured on the left, considered by many as the greatest theologian of the 19th century, on the proper understanding of the often quoted and falsely understood axiom, Papa dubius, nullus papa. All right. These cookies are just annoying. All right. In 1857, Franzlin was appointed professor of dogmatic theology at the Collegio Romano, a position he kept until 1876. Named consultor of the Sacred Congregation of Extraordinary Ecclesiastical Affairs on April 23, 1869, he served as papal theologian in the First Vatican Council and made a considerable contribution to the drafting of the Constitution De Fide Catholica, or the Catholic Faith. Consultor of the Sacred Congregations of Propaganda Fide, Tridentine Council, Extraordinary Ecclesiastical Affairs, and Qualificator of the Holy Office. Created cardinal on April 3, 1876 by Pope Pius IX, the latter appointed him prefect of the Sacred Congregation of Indulgences and Relics on March 28, 1885. His theological works are known throughout the Church for their solidity, erudition, and scrupulous accuracy. Here's a passage from Cardinal Franzlin that discusses the doubtful pope axiom. Short version. Once a man has become a true pope, no doubt on the part of the Church can deprive him of the pontificate. If the whole Church were to doubt the legitimacy of a papal claimant, this would be a certain sign that he was never a true and legitimate pontiff. Cardinal Franzlin, S.J., De Ecclesia Christi, pages 230 to 36, translated from Latin. All right, so let me see. All right, let's read this. Stolion. It seems opportune in this place to very briefly set forth our opinion on the manner in which the extinction of this most calamitous schism and restoration of the full unity of the Church, or rather of the actual communion of all Catholics with the legitimate heir to the Apostolic See, should in our view be explained. For granting that all theologians, and indeed the whole Church, entirely agree as to the fact itself of the extinction of the schism by the legitimate and undoubted election of Martin V, okay, he's talking about the Western Schism, I believe, as the one true successor of Peter, nevertheless, there is no such consensus, and indeed there exists no small difference of opinion among theologians and interpreters of the law when there is question of the manner in which this happy outcome was legitimately arrived at. Especially now, after the lucid and explicit definitions of the Vatican Council on the divine rights of the primacy and on the relations that exist between it and the whole rest of the Church, for a more certain and firm treatment of the proposed question, the dogmatic principles should be kept in view, which are contained in these very definitions of the Council or necessarily follow from them. 1. As by divine law, the primacy is established in Peter to be propagated in each one of his legitimate successors, for however long the Church built upon this rock continues standing. The legitimate election to the Roman pontificate is merely a condition which, being fulfilled, the one elected thus enters into the series of successors of Peter, and by this fact receives the whole divinely instituted power of primacy, not from the electors who do not have it, but by force of the institution of Christ, and from Christ the institutor, as being a rock by a participatory power from Christ, who is a rock by his own native power. 2. To the one established as pontiff, the church both in her individual pastors and flocks and sheep, and likewise viewed as a whole with all pastors and flocks and sheep taken together, is subject as one flock to the one supreme pastor. Not that the church even taken altogether has any power of jurisdiction over the supreme pastor himself, but he has the plenitude of power over her, as over his flock, according to the divinely established norms. Thus, no power exists in the church, which, once a pontiff has been constituted, could diminish or take away the supreme power divinely conferred with all its rights. The power established by Christ and bestowed upon the successor of Peter cannot cease in him except either 1. By spontaneous renunciation, the validity of which is quite certain after the definition of St. Celestine V on account of doctrines and deeds that are notorious in the universal church, or 2. By spontaneous defection from the church by manifest and contumacious heresy. Whether such a scandal could occur in him who, as pastor and doctor of the church, by the promised institution of Christ, cannot formally err in his definitions. Let me see here, hold on. Whether such a scandal could occur in him who, as pastor and doctor of the church, by the promised institution of Christ, cannot formally err in his definitions, and even as a private person has never done such a thing, not without reason, is doubted by theologians, considering the sweet providence of Christ for his church and the divine promises themselves. Okay, so he's basically saying, like, it is basically, you see, it is doubted by theologians. Okay, yeah, so he's basically saying theologians doubt that it is even possible for a pope to actually become a formal heretic. Like, it has never happened before. And so they're saying, like, we don't even think that's possible, right? And it would make sense to me as well, because it would seem that the office of the papacy itself basically should grant that person immunity from becoming a heretic, you know? But it is not, I don't believe it's certain that it can't happen, but St. Robert Bellarmine, I believe, said it is very doubtful that it could happen. And of course, other theologians that he referenced here as well believe that. And to me, that makes sense. But of course, if the contrary were true, then the truth will be the truth no matter what it is, right? 4. Let's see. All right, 4. Neither into formal heresy nor into material heresy by positively denying what is revealed or by affirming as revealed what is not revealed can fall the whole church. Okay, so neither into formal heresy nor into material heresy by positively denying what is revealed or by affirming as revealed what is not revealed can fall the whole church, the kingdom of truth, by the promise of the Spirit of truth remaining in her for eternity. You see, and look at this. This is an excellent point. This is an excellent point right here. I love this point. He's saying that it is not possible for the whole church to fall into either formal heresy or material heresy, because a point that I'd like to touch on later in future sections about, like, say, sedevacantism and membership in the church and stuff like that. Basically, all, like, 99% of sedevacantist so-called priests and bishops teach heresy. This is just a fact. This is not even debatable. Anyone who's seen the Baptism of Desire video, if they're being honest with themselves, they have to admit that basically all sedevacantist priests, well, so-called priests and so-called bishops, teach heresy on salvation, because almost all of them are either Fenites or Indifferentists. Therefore, what does that mean? That means that they're not the Catholic Church, okay? These sedevacantist so-called priests and bishops, they're not the Catholic Church. I don't see how God would allow the entire Catholic hierarchy to be teaching heresy, whether they're formal heretics or material heretics. Either way, right? That just doesn't make any sense to me. So that to me is another sign, another piece of evidence to show that sedevacantism is not the true church, is not the true position, right? Because those clerics, They're all heretics, basically. Why would the church have nothing but heretics as clerics? That doesn't make any sense, right? All right, continuing. So that's a great point right there. I like that point. All right. By the same reasoning from the promise of perennial unity, whose center and visible bond is the Roman Pontiff. Let me start over this part. Neither into formal heresy nor into material heresy, by positively denying what is revealed, or by affirming as revealed what is not revealed, can fall the whole church, the kingdom of truth, by the promise of the Spirit of truth remaining in her for eternity. By the same reasoning from the promise of perennial unity, whose center and visible bond is the Roman Pontiff, the whole church, the body of Christ, can never be separated from a true and legitimate Roman Pontiff, its visible head, neither by a formal nor by a material schism. So you see, he talks right here about formal and material schism, right? So I would think that like the Western schism, at least people who were like say sincerely mistaken about who the Pope was, they were materially in schism, but not in formal schism, right? Because they were basically trying to follow the true Pope, but they didn't know who the real Pope was and stuff like that, right? All right, like St. Vincent Ferrer at a time. So he's saying right here that the whole church, like it can't be possible that the entire church should not be, should have like schism from a true Pope, right? Continuing. If at some time such a secession of the whole church may appear to have happened, as in the last years of Peter de Luna, who was called Benedict XIII, this is not a defection from the true and legitimate pontiff, depriving him of his power, which is impossible, but it is a certain sign that he has never been a true and legitimate pontiff. Therefore, what is said by many to explain the acts of the gatherings at Pisa and at Constance in the form of an axiom, a doubtful pope is no pope, is only true if there is doubt, and on account of the doubt, there is a secession of the whole church. But it cannot be admitted if after a pontiff is legitimately constituted, in a part or even in the greater part of the church, doubts and secessions arise on account of disturbances that have been introduced. So he's saying like, even most of the church could doubt a pope's legitimacy, but not the whole church, okay? And of course, there have always been members of the church who have been aware of Gregory XVII, because of course there were cardinals in the conclave who may have been like his allies and stuff like that, or you know what I mean? Like there's always been real clerics and stuff who were aware of what took place in there and stuff like that. So let's continue here. 5. When a part of the church, without its own fault, on account of obscurity introduced into things, by a material schism, adheres to someone as legitimate Roman pontiff, some of its jurisdictional acts, especially those that concern the internal forum, can acquire validity by a colored title, but neither by it nor by any power, even legitimate, of an inferior, can the laws established by a true Roman pontiff be validly abrogated or changed, especially those that determine the validity of acts related to the visible foundation itself of the church, as is the election of the head of the church. These principles being stated, we cannot understand how one could admit either the opinion of those who, in explaining the acts of the Council of Constance, say with Bellarmine and Suarez that the right of all three, who at that time claimed the pontificate for themselves, was doubtful because the individual obediences as the parts adhering to diverse pontiffs were called, regarded two of them as illegitimate. However, such a doubtful pontiff is not a true pontiff, or as we heard Suarez saying, it could be that none of them had been a certain pontiff and thus not a pontiff at all, because none of them had yet been received by the sufficient consent of the church. But he who is legitimately elected by that fact is constituted a true pontiff, not by the church, but by Christ himself. Nor is the sufficient consent of the church required or to be waited for as a condition that he be a true pontiff, but sufficient consent by the prayer and promise of Christ for the unity of his church certainly follows on account of the obedience that is owed, because he is a true pontiff. Furthermore, it is evident that at Constance, as regards the manner of election and the legitimate electors themselves, many things were declared and done that were aside from and against the laws for the valid election established by the supreme power of the Roman pontiffs Alexander III, Gregory X, and Clement V. But such a change and suspension of laws of the supreme power could not be made except by the same supreme power of the Roman pontiff, as follows from the divinely constituted relation itself of subjection to the whole church beneath the power of the supreme pastor. As we see that even Suarez admits, because an inferior power cannot change what has been established by a superior, and because to Peter alone the primacy has been given for himself and his successors, to him alone or to the supreme pontiff belongs to prescribe the manner of his election and succession. So they're saying that basically an illegitimate authority, an illegitimate pope cannot change the papal election conditions instituted by a legitimate pope before him, right? Only a future legitimate pope could make those changes. Let's see here. Okay, continuing. Now, indeed, if at that time there was no true pontiff, because, as these theologians say, none was undoubted and certain, it is manifest that the inferior power of the congregation in Constance would have acted against the manner of election prescribed by the supreme power of the supreme pontiffs. Okay? Nor was only the manner prescribed for the election changed by admitting as electors besides cardinals also other bishops and simple priests, who indeed did not belong to the clergy of the Roman Church, but difficulties existed with regard to even the cardinals themselves, taken from the three obediences, which difficulties I do not see solved, nor indeed mentioned by these theologians, nor likewise do I see how under their hypothesis they could be solved. For if for about 40 years, 27th of March 1378, when Gregory XI died, until the election of Martin V on the 11th of November 1417, nobody is said to have been a true pontiff. How could all these cardinals who were created by these pseudo-pontiffs be regarded as legitimate, who nevertheless, although taken from diverse obediences and from contrary pontiffs, recognized each other as legitimate in the gatherings of Pisa and Constance, and contradicting the pontiffs themselves, by whom they were created, claimed for themselves all the rights of cardinals? Further, if the election of Urban VI, 8th of April 1378, was invalid, why was the other not valid of Clement VII, 20th of September 1378? If, however, which cannot now be justly called into doubt, Urban was truly created, and by those very cardinals, who afterwards defected by public acts and written letters, was acknowledged as the legitimate successor of St. Peter, at least until the month of June. Let me read that again, hold on. If, however, which cannot now be justly called into doubt, Urban was truly created, and by those very cardinals, who afterwards defected, by public acts and written letters was acknowledged as the legitimate successor of St. Peter, at least until the month of June, how by their subsequent secession, and by the doubt thenceforth by wicked arts gradually propagated to many, did he fall from the pontificate, who held it as bestowed not by the cardinals nor by the church, but immediately from Christ God? So he's saying, like, even like, let's say a real pope is elected, the cardinals can't take the papacy from him, right? Their obedience or their lack of obedience doesn't take the papacy away, because the office of the papacy, they choose the person, but the office itself and the rights of it are directly given by God, right? So they can't take that from the pope, from a legitimate pope, Therefore, if he could not be despoiled of the divinely bestowed pontificate by any acts of man whatsoever, but until his death, 15th of October 1389 in his Roman see, but until his death remained the true successor of Peter, doubtless his successors elected according to all the established laws, Boniface IX, Innocent VII, and Gregory XII, were true and legitimate successors in the see of Peter. For those doubts which by the offending cardinals were brought in and propagated after the election and acknowledgement of Urban had been established, and which they thenceforth extended to his successors, could only suffice, as we said above, so that those attached to the factions of Robert of Geneva, Clement VII, and of his successor Peter de Luna, Benedict XIII, or thereafter of Alexander V, elected at Pisa, 26th of June 1409, and of his successor John the 23rd, look at that name again, John the 23rd, were not formally but only materially schismatics, and thus there could be found among them even holy men. But neither these doubts nor what followed from them in the gathering at Pisa by the election even of a third, who assumed the name of Roman Pontiff, could take away from Urban VI and from his validly elected successors the dignity and power over the universal church. I want to see this part again. Give me a second here. Therefore, I want to see the material schismatic part again. For those doubts which by the offending cardinals were brought in and propagated after the election and acknowledgement of Urban had been established, and which they thenceforth extended to his successors, could only suffice, as we said above, so that those attached to the factions of were not formally but only materially schismatics. Okay. All right, let's continue. But neither these doubts nor what followed from them in the gathering at Pisa by the election even of a third, who assumed the name of Roman Pontiff, could take away from Urban VI and from his validly elected successors the dignity and power over the universal church. The accusation of schism and of notorious heresies brought in by Pisa against Gregory XII, that as a promoter and defender of an inveterate schism he denied the revealed truth of the unity of the church, and therefore had fallen from the pontificate, involves a contradiction. For if he was the true pontiff, having from Christ the supreme power over the universal church, then by defending his power against adversaries who were at least materially schismatics, he did not attack, in fact, much less did he deny the doctrine of the unity of the church instituted by Christ chiefly in its head and beneath its visible head. Nor afterwards did Constance itself ever acknowledge these notorious heresies of Gregory or the truth of the judgment of Pisa, as will soon be clear. For it is not therefore necessary to deny that Gregory was obligated to freely renounce, the pontificate in that disturbance of the church, and that he could have sinned in resisting this obligation. For it is not therefore necessary to deny that Gregory was obligated to freely renounce the pontificate in that disturbance of the church, and that he could have sinned in resisting this obligation. But the assertion that the pontiff is deprived of his power on account of sins other than heresies is condemned in Article 8 of Wycliffe and in Articles 12, 13, 20, 22, and 24 of John Huss, as defined by Martin V in the same Council of Constance. Okay? So yeah, you see here what I was talking about before about someone being potentially material schismatic, right? Where they don't have that malicious will to reject the Pope and stuff like that. And that's why, as I said before, based on even the Western Schism, I believe it's possible for someone to be a real Catholic and be sincerely mistaken about who the Pope was, as we saw like during the Western Schism with St. Vincent Ferrer and stuff like that. But unless you do acknowledge and accept the true Pope, right, you can't be certain that you're in the church. And I can't be certain that you're a real Catholic. Unity with the Pope is the way by which we are made certain that we're in the church. He's the visible beacon by which we know that we are with Christ, So, yeah, that was very interesting. I might look into the Western Schism even more, because I'm very interested in learning about how the different groups were theologically considered, as far as material schismatics and formal schismatics and that kind of stuff is very, very interesting to me. And of course, it would shed greater light on our situation, which is like way worse than the Western Schism. The Western Schism was like what do you call it? Like a drill. The Western Schism was just a drill. This is the actual crisis, that was just like a test to prepare for this, All right, so let's go back to the slides now. All right. Continuing on the visibility of the Pope, right? Some make the argument of, well, what does he look like? Can he make a video? That kind of stuff. First of all, as I mentioned before, his life is in grave danger, right? He's in grave danger of being assassinated. So it makes sense that the Pope he chooses not to show himself publicly right now. And regarding the, what does he look like? Can you make a video? That kind of stuff. before the advent of modern media, most Catholics never saw the Pope because most Catholics didn't live in Rome and the Pope did not visit every diocese in the world, right? So there were many Catholics in the world before modern media and stuff who never, actually saw the Pope. They might have seen a painting perhaps, but they may not have even seen that, They would just hear like from their bishop, oh, the Pope has given this decree and stuff like that kind of thing. Most Catholics only heard of the Pope and obeyed him through their obedience to their local bishops. Therefore, your not knowing what the Pope looks like doesn't make him any less the Pope. Okay? And as I keep saying, prophecy said he would be hidden from the world during our time, which is completely consistent with the fact that Gregory the 18th is so hidden we don't even know what he looks like. Like that is what was prophesied. This is just prophecy being fulfilled. This is just God's will being fulfilled. That's all it is. It shouldn't be a cause for scandal to be, scandalized by it. Finally, I think, let me see right here. Yeah, also his life is in grave danger, explaining why he remains hidden and unseen by the world. Finally, there was a Pope, Pope St. Caius, who hid in the catacombs for 8 years. Because he was hidden away, didn't make him any less the Pope, okay? You don't have to know who the Pope is for the Pope to be the Pope. Like that's legit. Once he's elected and accepts the papacy, he is the Pope, whether you know it or not, okay? It's just like the Catholic Church is God's church, whether a heretic believes it is or not, right? So let's look at this article here. All right. The Hidden Pope, St. Caius, Ora Pro Nobis. The following excerpt is from What Catholic Faith Is by the highly esteemed theologian Father Michael Muller, CSSR. St. Basil says, faith, always powerful and victorious, exercises a greater ascendancy over minds than all the proofs which reason and human science can furnish, because faith obviates all difficulties, not by the light of manifest evidence, but by the weight of the infallible authority of God, which renders them incapable of admitting any doubt. This is the reason why the Church allows none of her children to call into question her divine mission. The light of faith which shines upon the mind of a Catholic so utterly consumes doubt that hereafter he cannot entertain it except by his own great fault. Faith, says St. Alphonsus, is a virtue or a gift, which God infuses into our souls in baptism, by which gift we believe the truths which God himself has revealed to the Holy Church, and which she proposes to our belief. This is, let me see, I think there's an image of Pope St. Caius probably. Pope St. Caius stayed hidden in the catacombs for 8 years to preserve himself for his flock. The saint was eventually captured and martyred via decapitation. St. Caius's tomb with the original epitaph was discovered in the catacomb of Calixtus in Rome. Here it says, St. Caius encouraged St. Sebastian and the other martyrs and confessors. However, to preserve himself for his flock, he withdrew for a time to avoid the fury of the storm. And of course, there's a prophecy talking about there being a storm against this current pope, okay? How much greater of a storm does the current pope have than what Pope St. Caius had, right? So if Pope St. Caius lawfully and justly hid in the catacombs, how much greater reason does Gregory the 18th have to hide in the metaphorical catacombs by being unknown to the world, right? Or hiding himself from the world. Says source, The Lives of the Primitive Fathers, Martyrs, and Other Principal Saints by Reverend Alban Butler, 1799 imprimatur. Note, also see the ancient original Liber Pontificalis historical account of the life of Pope and Martyr St. Caius, attributed to the Church Father and Dr. St. Jerome. By the Church is meant the congregation of all who are baptized and profess the true faith under a visible head, that is, the sovereign pontiff. And a note about visible head. Visible head does not mean a pope is forbid. They said forbid, but a pope is forbidden from fleeing persecution via concealment, as Pope Caius chose for the majority of his reign, see above, or as Pope Pius IX did during the 1848 Masonic persecution in Rome by fleeing the Roman papal palace clandestinely. making himself invisible by wearing a disguise during his dangerous journey into exile in Gaeta, Italy. Okay? I say the true faith to exclude heretics who, though baptized, are separated from the church. I say under a visible head to exclude schismatics who do not obey the Pope, and on that account easily pass from schism to heresy. St. Cyprian well says, heresies and schisms have no other origin than this, the refusal to obey the priest of God, and the notion that there can be more than one priest at a time presiding over the church, and more than one judge at a time filling the office of vicar of Christ. All right. Yeah, I think that's it. Let me see. So this is from What Catholic Faith Is by Father Michael Muller, from his classic book, The Catholic Dogma, New York, Cincinnati, and Chicago, Benzinger Brothers, printers to the Holy Apostolic See, Primissio Superiorum 1888. And it says, a quote here, the church shall be, as it was in the beginning, invisible, hidden in catacombs. And this is the Catacomb of Calixtus. In the last days, this is the Henry Edward Cardinal Manning quote, then the church shall be scattered, driven into the wilderness, and shall be for a time as it was in the beginning, invisible, hidden in catacombs, in dens, in mountains, in lurking places. For a time it shall be swept, as it were, from the face of the earth. Such is the universal testimony of the fathers of the early centuries. Cardinal Manning, Archbishop of Westminster, 1861 AD. All right, it says, ubi Petrus, ibi ecclesia, where Peter is, there is the church, right? And I'm going to hammer this point home for all the sedevacantists out there. Any sedevacantists who see this video, prophecies do not speak of what you believe, okay? They all talk about what? The church being invisible, the Pope being hidden, the Pope being taken prisoner, the Pope being unknown to the world, the Pope suffering. That is what is happening. And because that is what is happening, because the Pope is hidden, you therefore draw the false conclusion, the false assumption that there is no Pope. Just because you don't see a Pope doesn't mean there is no Pope, okay? The Pope being the Pope does not at all depend on your knowledge of him, okay? There is indeed a Pope. He is just currently invisible, which perfectly explains why sedevacantists exist in the first place, because since they don't see a Pope, they assume that there is no Pope, which is not accurate. All right, and I think that is the end of this chapter, or this section. Yeah, so the next recording I'll do will be for section 4, prophetical proof. I've been recording this video like all day, so I think I'm going to call it a day for now. And, thank you for watching. God willing, I'll continue with section 4 in the next, major installment of this episode. Episode 2, what happened to the Pope? Exactly what the fathers said would happen. He is currently invisible, unknown to the world. He is suffering in the catacombs, and most people are completely unaware of his existence, just as prophecy said would happen.